Hi everyone, this is Robert. Welcome to In Deep Geek Live. Today we are looking at A Song of Ice and Fire, an open Q&A about A Song of Ice and Fire, really. As always, I'll be framing this around questions from my patrons and as many questions as I can get through in the chat. By way of a very brief introduction, if you're wondering where we're at the time of recording this with The Winds of Winter, George R. R. Martin has been giving a few little updates recently. If you've missed them, they've all been relatively consistent. He is most of the way through it. He can see the end. Basically, he says that he's 3/4 of the way through writing it. He's done 1,100 pages. There are 400-500 pages to go. He's finished a few arcs. He's got a few more character arcs to finish off. So it won't be here this year. It's not going to be here next year. Probably won't be here the year after, but he is making progress, and at some point it will get here. So occasionally we get all these kind of clickbaity stories coming through about George R. R. Martin gives huge update. He's not giving huge updates. He may do another update in the new year. He often does at some point early in the new year just to say where he's at, but I'm not expecting it to say anything different to what he's said quite a few times over the last few months about how far he's through. Progress is being made, but we're not there yet. Before we get into A Song of Ice and Fire fully, we've got a few other little bits and pieces to pick up on in sort of the wider world of things that I'm covering. His Dark Materials, if you're a fan of His Dark Materials, Season 3, the final season, is now out. The first 3 episodes of it are, in fact. That is, unless you're in the UK. The first 2 seasons came out first in the UK, then a few days later appeared in the rest of the world. This time, for reasons I do not know, it's turned around, so I have not seen them yet. But if you are in the UK, check out the iPlayer in, I think, 2 days' time, and we will be caught up. So that's the first thing. Second thing to say is, what was I going to talk about? Henry Cavill. Yeah, a lot of people talk about Henry Cavill. The update here, obviously we're concerned about The Witcher. He has definitely left The Witcher, but he has now also, as of today, left Superman. This seems to have been a bit of surprise to him. He, as far as I understand it, had agreed to do a few more Superman movies, but then they decided to go in a different direction, and he is now not doing any more Superman movies. He seems to go through these things in a very professional manner, open and upfront and honest about these things. But it does mean he's now a man in search of a franchise. So feel free in the chat to fan cast him wherever you wish. He's got a little bit more time on his hands, so who knows where he may end up. I'll read out a few of the fan casting in just one moment. Thirdly, I did mention that the official HBO Game of Thrones con was happening last weekend, and I suggested that perhaps we should be keeping an eye out there for any announcements that they may wish to make. They didn't make any announcements, is the short version of this. If you trawl through Twitter, the internet more generally, you'll find a few bits and pieces that came out. There was one deleted scene, which was quite interesting to see. There were some interesting cast interviews for both House of the Dragon and Game of Thrones cast members, but no massive announcements. So we're still waiting for that. I did have a question as I'm covering this 444. Said, why do you think there are no announcements for new series from HBO set in Westeros or Essos? Is this because House of the Dragon wasn't a big enough success? Is it because the new HBO parent company is not interested in more content except flagship series? Or maybe it's just because all projects are too early in development hell to decide what to greenlight at this stage? Well, I will be honest and say this is actually starting to perplex me, because I think we have the answers to these. The first one, was House of the Dragon a big enough success to prompt them to do other spin-offs? Yes, absolutely. There's no doubt about this. It wasn't just a big success for them. This was a massive success beyond their wildest hopes. I suspect HBO, obviously a big production company, but they're pretty stable through most of their life, and then suddenly Game of Thrones, the biggest TV show of all time, viewership then dropped back down to their normal level. Obviously, still lots of big hits, but nothing amazing. House of the Dragon came. Suddenly, that becomes their second biggest thing of all time, behind only Game of Thrones. So this is a huge hit for them. There is no reason why they shouldn't be pushing forward with this. Is it because of the new parent company wish to focus on other things? I think that's possible. I get the feeling that not just HBO, Netflix, other media companies are going through a period of assessing everything that they are producing or potentially producing, and reassessing whether or not they wish to go ahead with it. So I think everything is taking a lot more time nowadays. As to the final bit you were asking, is it because they're too early in development? I think the short answer is no. I don't think so. I think the reason why I'm starting to get a little bit uncertain about this is because some of these projects have been in development now for 3 years, maybe even 4 years, and they're not just with unknown talents behind them. Bruno Heller is in charge of the Corlys Velaryon potential spin-off. He's very well known to HBO. He ran Rome, also The Mentalist, which was a lot of fun. So he's very well known and respected. But as I understand it, that's on a third or fourth rewrite. So what's going on? I think we don't know. I'm still expecting at some point soon for there to be an announcement. I had assumed it was going to be at the con, but perhaps, well, obviously it wasn't. So probably at some point in the new year. I still can't believe that they will not expand this out beyond the one show that they've got running here, House of the Dragon. At the very least, I think we'll get an anime or something like that. Okay, let's go to in the chat. To 13 saying, I love your work. Here's some money. Oh, thank you very much. Appreciate that. That's very kind. Roman Lakovets saying, have you seen recent discussions of early drafts of A Feast for Crows from the Crushing Library? What are your thoughts? I have not. I will have a look at that and perhaps report back next time. So no, I don't know anything about that, I'm afraid. But if somebody's got early drafts of George R. Martin's writing, then obviously that's interesting. I had thought that he wouldn't have released any of that. Marvin Martin saying, could the prejudices against bastards, women, etc., have something to do with Aegon's prophecy, the Bloodstone Emperor, etc.? Well, potentially. So things to do with the Bloodstone Emperor and ancient Yeti, this is all, I think, bracketed under George R. Martin's idea of ancient history / legend. So we shouldn't take what we read there as fact in any way, shape, or form. He reiterates again and again that anything you get as legend within the world of Song of Ice and Fire is legend. This is not actually what happened. It's just a story which has been passed down generation to generation. Yes, there's probably some truth in it, but what that truth is has probably been lost to time. As for the Aegon's prophecy, this being the one that we've had revealed in House of the Dragon, this idea that the Targaryens have to rule Westeros, have to unite Westeros, and therefore it is for them to be defending humanity, the planet, against the others, this great force from the north. Is there any element here? I mean, I think that this probably does mean or add to their desire to pure the blood of Targaryens, because the Targaryens have to be there, not just some other family, not just a family that used to be Targaryens, not the Blackfires who are heading off doing something else. That kind of idea. So in there, the bastardy idea clearly does have an important role. As for women, I think, well, that is endemic clearly within Westerosi society, this kind of anti-women, not just in terms of the establishment, in terms of um, birthrights and things like that, but how history is recorded, writing women out of history. Is that connected in with prophecy? I think that's more connected in terms of history with the Maesters. So when we get the Maesters recording history, they could have recorded it in any way they wanted to. They chose not to include women who sat on the Iron Throne as part of the list of rulers, for example. Reflective Rambling talking about his Dark Materials, saying impressed with all of season 3 so far, but James and Ruth are just killing it. Israel and Marissa for me. Well, they definitely have done in season 2. I mean, I think season 1 as well. That was Mrs. Coulter. Wonderful. I think it has to be said. Little bit of fan casting going on there here for Henry Cavill. Seymour Broom saying he'd be great as Aegon the Conqueror or anything else like Robert Baratheon or Cregan Stark, but he'd probably be too old for that. Yeah, I tend to think with Cregan Stark should be about 20, give or take. So I think probably Henry Cavill is too old for that. I think he would work very well as a Baratheon. But as you say, Andrew Kay, he's such a big star, you'd expect him to be headlining his own series if he's going to be doing that. So I'll just have a quick flick through. Fred saying Superman, Batman. I'll give my thoughts in just one moment on where I think he would fit within the world of A Song of Ice and Fire. Superman, Batman, Robin Hood, James Bond, Arthur. I like it when different actors play these characters. Graham Highlander saying, "Aren't they in 007?" Absolutely. Magical 55 saying a Drunken Egg series, please. Yeah, so there are lots of things that he could do. My take, I think, clearly, as he's a big star, he will want his own show. I think he works within the A Song of Ice and Fire universe. If we were to tie him down to that, I think he does fit the Baratheon mold. I think he would put him well in that. I think I've just been doing a couple of videos, another couple of collaborations with History of Westeros, actually, on Maegor. And I think if we had to have him as a Targaryen, that's who I think he fits best. It would be against his normal type of being the hero guy, but as a physique, he is so big, bulky, that I think that really works for Maegor. So that would be who I would personally fan cast him as, if I had the choice. Julia goes, well, thank you very much. Incredibly generous super chat. Thank you so much. That's very kind. Saying, hello, long-time subscriber and Patreon. I've always enjoyed your videos and was partially inspired by you to start my own YouTube channel on a book series. Soon to be turned into a TV show, Percy Jackson. And now that I'm doing that, I greatly appreciate your hard work. Well, good luck with the channel. I mean, if you drop a link, I will very happily give a shout out to that. Yeah, Percy Jackson, for those who don't know it, the books are being turned into a TV show. So I've heard good things about the people behind that. Obviously, it's not been filmed yet, so we'll have to wait and see. But yeah, do drop the link in the chat, and I will happily give you a shout out. Thank you so much. JJ saying, do you think that Joramun, the first king beyond the wall, was a Stark or Snow? If the Horn of Winter wakes the Stark dead, it would be strange if the only person known to have blown it didn't have Stark blood. Yeah, so this is interesting. So the Horn of Winter is said to have been used when this is a Song of Ice and Fire world rather than the show world. The Night's King, not the Night King, the Night's King, who was the 13th Lord Commander of the Night's Watch, who basically turned bad and started consorting with the others and doing all kinds of nefarious stuff. Eventually, the Starks and the King Beyond the Wall came together and defeated him. And we're told that as a part of that, Joramun, King Beyond the Wall, blew the Horn of Winter, and giants were raised from the earth, and the Night's King was defeated. Now, the other element of this is the Stark King at the time was Brandon the Breaker. So, is it possible that Joramun could have been a Stark? Well, it's possible. Again, this has to fit onto the category of legend, so we shouldn't take the exact story as exactly right. But could, well, to take a step back here, I think you've hit the nail on the head in terms of who can blow the Horn of Winter. Because if you were to go into the current story, otherwise I would say, who is it who naturally should be able to blow the Horn of Winter? And you'd say, well, maybe there are a few different characters who could. Maybe it should be blown by a Stark, by the Lord of Winterfell. Maybe we think it should be blown by the prince that was promised, so some sort of child of prophecy. Maybe it should be the Lord Commander of the Night's Watch. Lots of different possibilities. All of these possibilities, incidentally, you could focus in on Jon. So my best take is that when we do get the Horn of Winter brought back up north, then it will be Jon who does blow the Horn of Winter. But the person we know who did blow it in the past was Joramun. Does that make him a Stark? I mean, it's possible. We don't know any of that story about who this person was, why they had possession of the Horn of Winter in the first place, exactly what happened. I think one thing is reasonably clear is that the wall did not fall down, which was what the rumor was when you blow the Horn of Winter. The one time we know it was blown, the wall did not seem to fall down. So, yes, I think is the short answer. It could have been, but we don't know any more details about that. Reflective Rambling saying that my audio is cutting or fading in and out a little bit. I do apologize for that. Hopefully that picks up. Let me know if it doesn't. Let's flick through to, I think I've got, also username redacted saying audio is a bit choppy. Apologies for that. Let me see. Maybe it's the connection a little bit. I will push it all in there. Hopefully that goes, that is all right. Question from Martin S. How does Valyrian steel work? What advantages does it have compared to regular steel? Is it as good as mithril in Tolkien's Legendarium? Well, how it works, George R. Martin is very clear. He doesn't want to tell us how magic works. He doesn't want us to be able to codify it or anything like that. What he will say, though, or what is apparent from what we've seen, is it lasts a long time. That's the first thing that's very clear. It lasts a long time. It is lighter than normal steel, and it is sharper than normal steel. So those things are things that are shared by mithril. Mithril, if you go across so I think Valyrian steel has got a hint of mithril to it. Mithril, however, is even more impressive than that. If you go into Tolkien's Legendarium, you'll find that it was not just a metal that could be used for swords and armor and things like that. You could the elves used it. If you remember the doors of Durin that the Fellowship were outside Moria, that the pattern that appeared over that was effectively, it was Ithildin, which is something which was made from mithril, and the elves made it so it could only appear in moonlight, and it could be used to be stitched into fabric. So when you get Arwen gives a banner to Aragorn, it has mithril stitching in it. So mithril is not just a metal, but it is something that can be manipulated into things of great beauty, as well as being used as a, a bit of armor. Valyrian still doesn't have that element to it. It has to be said. What makes it special? The things I've said, but there's also a hint of magic to it as well. So we'll see, I suspect, a lot more how it can be used against the others, and that comes from the magic that was there. Mara Lee, oh hi there, Mara, saying thank you, Robert, for all the fabulous content. That was a channel member comment. If you're a member here on the channel, then you get free super chats getting highlighted when you've been a member for a while. JD Finity saying, what determines if a person has king's blood? Did Rob's blood become more magically potent after being crowned? Is Joffrey's less, since he's not a true Baratheon? Love you and your content. Well, thank you. It's, again, George R. Martin doesn't go into details of this, but this is about sacrifice. This is about the importance of something that you are giving up. So when we're talking about king's blood, it's about the proximity to a king, therefore how important that person is, therefore how big a sacrifice are you making. So Melisandre uses Edric Storm, who is the bastard child of the king, Robert Baratheon. Similarly, we get Euron seemingly using his own bastard child with Thalia flowers as a form of sacrifice. If we get something similar, as I'm pretty sure we will in the books, as we did on the show, with the sacrifice of Princess Shireen, that is also king's blood. Now, is that because magically we say, well, Stannis is the rightful king? No, not necessarily. It's because this is a huge sacrifice. So king's blood is a concept rather than an equation, if that makes sense. It's to do with the sacrifice rather than to do with the specificity of who a specific person is, if that's there. So when you're saying, is Joffrey's less since he's not a true Baratheon? No, but he is a king and he is recognized as a king. So if Joffrey were to be sacrificed, then his king's blood would have the efficacy of a big sacrifice. Mara Lee, thank you so much. Very, very kind, saying a show of love and support. That's incredibly generous of you. Ubermelon saying a big hypothetical here. If Joffrey's conception wasn't discovered and Cersei had attempted or had accepted Ned's stewardship, how do you think Joffrey would have grown? Well, I think we can say this is a hypothetical, as you say. Cersei would not have accepted. Cersei would not have been Cersei as a character to have accepted Ned's stewardship. That's one of the wonderful things about George R. R. Martin's writing, is the fact that he follows the characters and he follows them and he allows them to go through. So this story would not work with that hypothetical. But let's go down there anyway, because you asked the question. So would Joffrey have turned out any different had Ned been the steward effectively? I think no. I mean, he might have been put in his place a bit more by Ned, but I think that in time, Cersei, or if not Cersei, then Tywin would have got rid of Ned. Yes, Ned would have been a good influence on him, I have no doubt, but he would have been looking to his mother, and it would have been, he was at an age where it had been inculcated with him for so long that anyone who is not of us is against us. He would not have seen Ned as a fatherly influence to guide him to maturity. He would have seen Ned as an opponent, and if anything, I suspect he would have doubled down. Carl Carsnock saying sounding better now. Good. Thank you very much. I think that's me caught up on questions from the chat. Let's go to a question from one of my patrons, Tom Kritoff, saying, "Good evening, Robert. Good evening to you too, sir. What scenes or chapters from the books do you wish we had got to watch in the show?" Well, this is an interesting, because obviously the bits that we have missed on the show are increasingly going to be the bits in the last two books. But of the books that we do have, I have a particular love for the chapters of Tyrion on the Shy Maid heading down the River Rhine. This is partly because I find Tyrion's character so fascinating, and this is where we just see him finally, probably for the first time. He's not trying to prove something to anyone. He's not trying to survive personally so much. Yes, occasionally he has to survive in the circumstances, but he's not fighting against his family. He's there just trying to figure out what's going on, and one by one he figures out who these characters are, what's going on, what's the situation here, and that I would have loved to see on the show. I thought that would have been great. Obviously, for that to happen, then they'd have had to go with the whole Fagon storyline, and they decided not to go there. But I would have loved to see that, and I think Peter Dinklage would have done a fantastic job of it, just shifting Tyrion's character from this embattled figure in King's Landing and providing the bridge that allows him to, when he comes up to meet Daenerys, he is not a new person, but he's a person with a different perspective on life. George R. R. Martin, he included two parts to allow this. The first is that part where he's traveling down the River Rhine, and he's got more time to reflect, to think, to lean into who he is. Then he has just this series of moments where his privilege, the respect that he has as a person gets stripped away. He's made a slave. He's forced into situations he can't use his wit to talk himself out of. That takes him to a position. So when he gets to Dany, that whole arc there is that when he does get to Dany, he is not the same person who left King's Landing all that time ago. Question from Flopsy B. Baelish, Littlefinger, and Jaime seem thematic opposites. One tells truths too complex to bear, the other lies that tells lies that one longs to hear. Might Jaime expose Littlefinger's lies? Interesting. Jaime you're right when you say he tells truths too complex to bear. I think he holds on to truths too complex to bear, is my take. When you're saying that Littlefinger tells lies that one longs to hear, yeah, absolutely. He figures out what it is that people need, or what works in that situation, and he tells that lie. But does that make Jaime and Littlefinger opposites? I think Jaime is not yet. He's going on a character arc. He's not yet in a position where he's out there telling the truth. So, is he going to be the person to expose Littlefinger's lies? I actually think this is going to be Sansa. Sansa is growing so much as a character. Pardon me, to the point where when she feels that she is in a safe space, then she will feel that she can then suddenly take control of things, and she doesn't want to be with Littlefinger. So that I think it's going to be Sansa. Tunhead777 saying, was honestly concerned George R. R. Martin was creeping up on Robert. Well, yeah, this is my I tried to place the background in an amusing way, so I'm glad you appreciated that. Question from Martin S. Who are the greatest smiths in George R. R. Martin's world history? Legendary craftsmen. Who are the greatest smiths in House of the Dragon and A Song of Ice and Fire time? So talk about Mott in King's Landing is the greatest smith in Westeros that we hear about. There are other good smiths, but he's the greatest. And he is the greatest because he comes from a Cohor. And Cohor is probably the place in the world that still has the greatest smiths because they retain the memory of how to forge Valyrian steel. When we hear about knowledge of this has been lost, yes, it has been lost, but the knowledge of how to not to create new Valyrian steel, but how to forge what we already have as Valyrian steel into something else. That's there. So Tobamot comes from Cohor, and he is, yes, he was a good smith there, as far as we can tell. But what sets him apart in King's Landing is the fact that he comes from there and he has that secret knowledge. Let's go to a question from George R.R. Tolkien saying, salutations, Robert. Salutations to you too. So I just wanted to ask why Aemon went with Bloodraven to the wall. Was it to solidify Aegon V being king? Yes, is the short answer. So this is going back in history. We have Aegon V, Egg, becomes king. He becomes king in a great council. Now, he was known as Aegon the Unlikely because when he was born, he was, I think, something like 16th in line. He was a long way down the list of potential successors to the throne. But they all died, some of them suspiciously, during that period of time. And they had to end up with this great council to just decide who's going to be king. And Bloodraven basically ruled it. And as part of that, one person who was theoretically ahead of Egg in line was Aemon, who we know as Maester Aemon. He was offered it. Some people got together and said, if you want to be king, we will make you king. And he said, no, I've sworn my oath to the Citadel. I didn't want to be king. And he was very close to Egg. Egg got offered it and accepted. We will read about that, I feel sure, in a future Dunk and Egg, assuming George R. R. Martin gets there. But once Aegon was therefore crowned, he offered Aemon, said, why didn't you come be Grand Maester? You can be here by my side, you can guide me, etc., etc. And Aemon said, actually, no, because, pardon me, because we're told he realized that if he stayed there would be people who would see him as a rival to the throne, because he had been offered the throne and turned it down. If they didn't like what Aegon was doing, which was entirely possible because Aegon was a person of the people. This is the whole Dunk and Egg story, is to show how Aegon can come into this without this position of Targaryen supremacy and with a love for the common people. The lords would potentially turn against him. And Aemon thought, who are they going to try and rally behind? Me, the person who could have been king. And the best way for me to help support Aegon is by going to the wall, just removing myself from this situation. So that is why he went up there. That it's possible, we have not been told this in the slightest, it's entirely possible that there was another element to this as well. We know that Aemon has, certainly towards the end of his life, he had dragon dreams of a sort. Bloodraven clearly was magical, and the two of them were close while they were at the wall. So it's entirely possible that there was another layer to this, that he decided to go with Bloodraven, but we have not been told that yet. So short answer is he went up there to help secure Aegon V's throne. Second part to George R. Tolkien saying, did Duncan Dragonflies and Jenny Oldstones have children, and do we know why and how he died? So this is Aegon V, Egg's oldest child, his firstborn son, Duncan Targaryen, named after Dunk. He was the heir, and he was betrothed to the daughter of Lord Baratheon. However, he fell in love with Jenny of Oldstones, and hence where the song comes from. And he got told, you either set her aside and marry the person you're supposed to marry, or you have to be disinherited. And he said, I'm sticking by my woman. I'm disinherit me then. And he was disinherited. He was taken out of the line of succession. He was allowed to stay at court. Jenny of Oldstones was allowed to stay at court. She became known as Lady Jenny. They didn't have children, and they both died at the tragedy of Summerhall. Now, this is perhaps crucial in a kind of a symbolic, magical way, because what we have is effectively three dragons dying, three king's bloods in a type dying at Summerhall. Egg, obviously himself, King Aegon V. Duncan, he was the heir until he stepped aside. So there's some king's blood going on there. And then Sir Dunk also died. I did a video on this ages ago, but he also symbolically has got king's blood because he, the heir to the throne, back in the Hedge Knight, the very first book, the very first Duncan Egg story, the heir to the throne died for him, for his foot, he says, because that was what he was due to lose, have his foot cut off. And he thinks, all through the three stories we have, he thinks about why is it? What is it that that I am effectively, what was I saved for? How can I be worth the death of a prince? And so he is, in sort of magical maths, he is carrying the weight of a Targaryen prince around with him. Wilma Cantor saying, except from Jaime and Sir Barristan, no one in Robert's Kingsguard seems to be good warriors. How did they become his Kingsguard to a warrior king? Well, interesting question. Some of them are Lannister loyalists, and that's how they got there. Robert Baratheon, when he became king, he just kind of switched off. that's the only way to say it. He won the kingdom. I don't think he ever really worried about his own safety. So it's a matter of the safety of his queen, his children, and he largely allowed Cersei and the Lannisters to decide who is there. So that's how they became members of the Kingsguard. If he'd had an interest, then yes, he could have organized contests. The winner of the contest joins the Kingsguard. He just didn't care. Once he was king, he just did the things that he enjoyed doing. He didn't want to actually rule. So that's how. It's because he didn't care. And though they are the Kingsguard, he's not appointing them himself. Martin S. Who do you think are the most intelligent Song of Ice and Fire characters? From the Game of Thrones show, I get the impression it is Varys and Littlefinger, as evil as the latter is, followed by Tywin and Tyrion. Yes, but all of them are intelligent. There's, I would put Tywin, obviously very clever, always slightly ahead of everybody else. Littlefinger thus far has managed to be staying one step ahead of everybody. Varys similarly does. Tyrion is always written by George R. Martin as being the cleverest person in the room, with one exception. And that one exception is, for show-only people, is sometimes a surprise, but when you read the book, you do see it, is Catelyn. she is not. She doesn't always get everything right. She sometimes um, jumps to conclusions, but there are a couple of times when she is clearly ahead of the game and ahead of everybody else. She is written that way by George R. R. Martin. He writes in the Catelyn chapters in Winterfell when she is with Ned. A couple of times, we see it from her POV. He's there. Certain things are said with her, Ned, and Maester, and it's just, we read, uh, she decided to stay silent. Ned would figure it out in a moment. And it's like, she knows she's quicker than Ned. She knows that Ned will get there in the end, but she just has to wait. And then she's the person who um, figures out a bit about what's going on with Bran. Um, Tyrion pretty much figures out who pushed Bran out of the off of the tower. Um, but we see Catelyn, without any knowledge of the individuals involved, also coming to the same conclusion. And then when Tyrion gets captured by Cat, and she does this, she doesn't do it in a subtle way. It's very open. She makes sure people are aware of it, and she deliberately makes sure that she heads off in a direction that she doesn't end up going in. And Tyrion himself gets fooled, and he thinks to himself, that doesn't happen much. I was convinced I knew where I was being taken. I was convinced I was going to Winterfell, and if I was convinced, everybody else there was also convinced where we were going. This was something she didn't, she just did by instinct. She naturally misled everybody, and that allowed her to get away with it. So Tyrion thinks that Cat is one of the cleverest characters as well. Let's go to a question from JJ. Tale of the Night's King equals a foreshadowing for the battle with the others. He's beaten by Bran the Breaker and Joramun. Now we have Bran the Broken and Jon. Jon's a king who was literally beyond the wall and found Joramun's spawn. Yeah, that's a really, I think you summarized that in a way that is probably better than I could actually. So thank you very much. So yeah, we have Brandon the Breaker was the Stark king at the time, and we are going to end up with Bran. I mean, this is what they said on the show, and it feels about right. Bran the Broken. He's also sort of called that a couple of times in the books as well. So that kind of matches up. Joramun, Jon, he is effectively the leader of the Wildlings because Mance, everybody thinks he's dead. He's headed down to Winterfell, and he is the person. And they basically say, "We will follow you, Jon." So he is effectively the leader of the Worldlings at this point. So coming back to the point that I made earlier about who is it who could potentially be blowing the horn of winter in the current story we have, is it the rightful Lord of Winterfell? Is it the prince that was promised? Is it the Lord Commander of the Night's Watch? Is it the King Beyond the Wall, the leader of the Wildlings? Jon could be described as all of those things. So yeah, I think you've put the nail on the head there. That's hit the nail on the head there. That's a really interesting point. A reflective, a rambling, picking up a question for Jamie the Guy. Thank you. I love it when people do this, pick up questions for other people. Will we ever find out which houses some of the prominent maesters come from? Sam and Aemon make no secret of theirs, but others, question mark. I don't think we'll find out all of them. We might find out one or two. The whole point about the maesters is once you become a maester, then you set aside your previous affiliations, and basically you become a maester. Now, I think we will obviously discover some are Hightowers. We certainly discover some when you read through Blood. We discover some as Hightowers, and Will we discover people like Qyburn? Personally, I suspect not. Um, when we get the Sam chapters, as we will in the Winds of Winter, will we get the identity of a few? Maybe. I don't. For the most part, I don't think this is important for the story. And I think that George R. Martin likes this kind of hints, possibilities that there might be a link somewhere, but that's about it. Mike Hunt, I have to pronounce that one carefully. Is the seed is strong? Mentioned by John Arryn and Ned, a Westerosi saying about the illegitimacy of an heir that started with Jace and Luke. I don't think it's specifically a saying about illegitimacy, but the idea of there being illegitimate children in line to the throne, clearly that has echoes back to the Dance of the Dragons. So the seed is strong. You could use for the strong boys. There's an echo there. That feels to me, I have to say, like one of those things that George might have retrofitted a little bit. It's the kind of thing that he might have thought, oh well, that works quite well. Why don't we make it how strong? The seed is strong, the strong boys, rather than something when he was writing the middle part of book one of Game of Thrones. I suspect he wasn't immediately thinking all the way to what about in the build up to the Dance of the Dragons? That came later. Question from E. Marty saying, I've been thinking about the pink letter. This is the letter that arrives at Castle Black. Jon gets it, and it prompts him to quit effectively and say he's going to go and head down to Winterfell, prompting his assassination. I've been thinking about the letter. Does Mance know how to read and write? Most at the Wall do not, and he was raised there. Yes, I think is the short answer. He's minstrel. I'm struggling to remember whether I've seen him actually reading and writing. There's always somebody cleverer than me in the chat who might be able to remember if there's a specific example of him reading and writing. But he is a minstrel, so he went to Winterfell a couple of times as Abel the Bard. So he certainly understands language. I don't think this is an objection to him potentially writing it. Indeed, it's written in quite a scratchy. When we read the pink letter, it's written in quite a scratchy type, as if it's not somebody who was taught by a Maester. AK Channel Down and chat. Hi there. How many pages do you reckon the Winds of Winter will be? Also, would the Greens have won if Otto found all the rest of it? Cheers. On the first bit there, how many pages do you reckon the Winds of Winter will be? Well, I think, when I did my How Long Will the Winds of Winter Be video, I think I concluded 1,600 pages. The George R. R. Martin, when his most recent thing that he said was, and he said this in a sort of a comedic setting, so I don't know exactly how seriously to take it, but it feels about right. He says he's done 11 or 1,200 pages now, and he's got 400 or 500 pages to go. So that feels like about 1,600 pages. Something like that is what I'm saying. He said it's going to be longer than the longest book so far. That's with Dragons, I think, technically is the longest one, but not hugely longer. So we're not talking 2,000 pages, pardon me, but it's not 1,000. It's something over 1,500 and less than 2,000 is the best answer we have at the moment. Would the Greens have won if Otto had found Aegon? This is a show question. because there's a difference in between the book Fire and Blood and the show on this point. Fire and Blood obviously is written from different perspectives, but we do have a broadly clear understanding on that of what happened in the Green Council when they decided to make Aegon king. And in that, they followed basically they were trying to follow Otto Hightower's, or on the show, what Otto Hightower was wanting to do. Postponed for a few days, right off to, but postpone the coronation for a few days, right off to allies, do clever things with distributing the funds in the treasury, and then a bit later send an assassin. So to go get Rhaenyra. So that was basically what happened in the book. On the show, you have these two different options of what to do. Otto has that plan, but Alicent has the plan. No, we should crown him straight away, Aegon straight away. We should do it full sight of everyone in a way that looks as legitimate as possible, and we should try and get peace with Rhaenyra. She wins. She gets Aegon. She gets to decide what to do. So, would it have been different if they'd gone down Otto's route? I think it would have gone down the route that happened in the book. Really, that's where we're at. And so, no, the only possible difference is the assassination attempt. In the book, they yes, there effectively was an assassination attempt later, but not immediately. This was the one big thing. I mean, can't really say we can hold against them, but if they were doing a brutal coup, the first thing they would have tried to do was kill Rhaenyra, and they simply did not try and do that in the book or on the show. So either way, it would have ended up roughly the same. Question from Quicks. How much time do you think is going to be devoted to resolving the long night? Well, assuming you mean so in the book, when we do get to the others heading south and the long night is there, I think this is going to be a long period. It should be. Well, my take is that probably the others will come south of the wall somewhere about, possibly even as the finale to the Winter. I think that should be the moment they kind of break across, roughly at the same time as Dany arrives with the dragons in the south of Westeros. They are arriving with the army of the dead in the north of Westeros. Now, when will that get resolved? It'll probably take half a book or so. So, Spain is going to be a long book as well. It probably will not surprise you, but yeah, we're talking, I don't know, 1,000 pages, so quite a long time. The Interesting Nerd Club, great name, saying, what are your thoughts on the Laenor Velaryon storyline in the coming seasons? I'm extremely psyched about it and pondering the possibilities. Okay. So, in the book, Laenor Velaryon is murdered. And he is actually murdered. It's not a cover-up. It was done with lots of witnesses. And that was the end of his story. On the show, obviously this was a cover-up. He is still alive. What might they do with him? Well, there are 3 broad options, I think. Option number 1 is he dies somewhere off screen, which is possible, a little bit anticlimactic. I suspect they're not going to go down that route, but that would be the easiest, a bit of a cop-out way out of the problems that I'm about to talk about in a moment. The second way is that he stays in Essos. Rhaenyra and Daemon have done a lot to make sure they have this new life, and they could have taken the time to call him back, but They have not. They could have got the Valyrians on side a lot quicker, Rhaenys on side a lot quicker, just by saying, actually, you know what, your son's not dead. That might have worked, but they clearly didn't. So they could just leave him there, living his new life. That would be the happiest end for him as a character. The problem with that is that, according to what happens in the book, then somebody else claims the dragon. Now, how might that happen? Well, they could say, actually, if a dragon rider abandons a dragon, they're up for grabs. A new person can come and claim them. They could do a clever thing and say, actually, this is a slightly different. They could invent a completely new dragon for Adam Velaryon to ride. That's a possibility, something that they could do, and just work way around the sea smoke problem by just not having anyone claim sea smoke, and Adam Velaryon rides a new dragon, or which some people have suggested, he comes back, pretends to be, takes this new name of Adam of Hull, different hairstyle, perhaps, different accent, saying twirling moustache or something, saying, "I'm definitely not that old person. I'm a new person, and I know that I look like the Velaryons because I'm actually a bastard Velaryon. Let me have a try upon you." Yeah, it worked. So that's the third option they've got. So where will they go? I mean, I don't know. My instinct is they're not going to go with the he dies off screen thing. They're not going to go with the, uh, or they might go with the he just lives happily ever after. But if they do, I think they might sidestep the dragon thing. But I, I do wonder whether they'll be able to resist the he comes back pretending to be Adam Velaryon. Martin S. What is Lysa Arryn's mental problem? Seems completely irrational. The worst of the Tully family. No match for Littlefinger's manipulations. Murders her husband and blames the Lannisters. Despicable. Yeah, I mean, she's a really interesting and well-written character. I mean, I don't mental problem. I would put it. She is clearly in love with Littlefinger, and in love is probably too light a way, but she's obsessed by him. And she also becomes obsessed with looking after her child, and that allows her to justify to herself a lot of the things that she's done. So that's the character where that might stem from in terms of sort of personality traits and things like that. I don't think George R. R. Martin's gone down that route. I think that he's just, and I don't think he wants us to go down that route of trying to put a label on things. I think he wants us to see and understand the character, which we do. Right from book one, when Kat goes there, she is taken aback by what has happened. So what this tells me is that whatever, yes, she would always had perhaps these tendencies, but it's become more so since the 15 years since Kat had previously seen her. JD Finity saying, what do you think Adam Velaryon learned on the Isle of Faces? I mean, I think this is a little bit of George R. Martin saying this. Adam Velaryon is one of two people we know of who goes to the Isle of Faces. He flies his dragon there, lands, gets off, allegedly talks to the green men, gets on his dragon, flies off again, gets into a battle and dies. So we don't know. We've literally no idea what it was. It wasn't some kind of warning to him, or otherwise, or maybe he just ignored it. Um, what could he have? I mean, I kind of um, I just wonder whether it was just actually whatever happens in this, everybody's going to die kind of thing, and so it's a fine. I just accept my fate kind of moment. Um, but ultimately, I do wonder whether George R. Martin has even made up his mind on it. I think he just likes having cool things that we can speculate on. I don't think that he's actually written down what happened in that conversation. He just thought, "Wow, that'll be good. That'll get them talking." Um, Skedu Vita saying, which author do you think has the best world building skills, Tolkien, Martin, or Pratchett? I mean, I think, but I've said this before. There's a difference in terms of world building with, and I suspect both George R. Martin and Terry Pratchett would have acknowledged this. That for Tolkien, what he did was create a world. He created a mythology. He created languages. He created legends. He created absolutely everything. And what we have as the two main stories, The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings, coming out from that, people think of them as the main stories from Tolkien. They're not. He saw them as just like little offshoots that came at the very end of all of this. That almost little stories compared to his main masterpiece. Whereas George R. R. Martin is writing his main masterpiece, and then off the back of that is writing background on history and lore. So it's a completely different approach, which makes Tolkien's world building, in my view, the greater. That's not little or demean George R. R. Martin's world building. What that means is that it's a matter of Tolkien has the world out of which stories come. George R. R. Martin has the story out of which the world has come, which is different. Terry Pratchett, I think, had an astonishing and vibrant imagination, um, but had a different approach in as much as his world was shaped by wherever his imagination went. It was a magical world, and he allowed it to do what he wanted to do. So I think that it was each story was he allowed the world building to shift and change to support each individual story. So again, a slightly different style. Kelly Summers saying, "Will George R. R. Martin always be two normal books from the end?" Maybe, I don't know. Depends what you call a normal book. Um, I don't think. I know I hate myself for saying this. I don't think he knows how close he is to the end. To be honest, he's. I see no reason not to take him at his word. He is 3/4 of the way through this book, but the Winds of Winter, I don't consider the Winds of Winter to be a book. Yes, it's going to be written as a book, but it will be released in more than one volume, two, maybe even 3 volumes, depending on how big it ends up. So, is he always going to be too? I mean, okay, I'll come out with a defense here of George R. R. Martin. Um, he has got an overall story arc that has not shifted. We talked. I did a video ages ago about his original idea for Song of Ice and Fire, and you can see there's huge differences and changes as he's gone along. But at a meta level, his story starts off small. Just we get Starks and we introduce the Lannisters, and we're dealing with politics of Westeros, and then it gets bigger. The characters go out; they go out to the four corners of the world. We see the twin threats of the dragons and the others, and then it starts coming back in. It has to, as a story arc as a whole, that's the way it's going to be. So, at the end of the Winds of Winter, Dany and Tyrion and co are going to be on their way back to Westeros, or have landed at Westeros. Arya is going to be probably back in Westeros. We're going to have Sam probably heading back up forth again. We're going to have the story starting to contract again. So he has moved through his story, and if you want the depressing news, he's in terms of the story arc, he's got to the middle point, the widest element, at the widest point of the story, and now it's coming back. So when he gets to the end of the Winds of Winter, we're then through past the largest part, and it's narrowing from that point on. We're going to lose main characters, and yes, he will introduce new characters, but the rate at which characters are lost will be greater than the rate at which new characters are introduced for the first time. I predict for the first time in the entire story. Question from let's try and find out where it was. The interesting nerd club again. Thank you. Good takes from good nerds. I love the idea that he's coming back as another sellsword, and they just get on the single dragon rider problem. This is talking about Lenore. I think his adopted son is dead. My man just cannot stay on vacation. So, yes, what could prompt him coming back? Jake's dying. He does seem to care about his adopted children, not as a sort of fatherly thing. He did seem to, the very small snapshot we saw, he did seem to care about the children, but not hugely. I suspect that the greater thing here will be that he thinks that he owes Rhaenyra and Daemon a debt, life debt. If Carl Corrie, his lover, dies, say, if he discovers that Rhaenyra has not got it, her claim has been usurped, might he feel that there's a debt, an honor debt that he has to go and help out? I think it's possible. Corvus Art, given that Lyanna had the wolf blood spirit, is there an option that Lyanna wasn't purely kidnapped or willingly left with Rhaegar, but both? I.e., at first it was love, then found she wasn't allowed to leave. Well, I think at first it was love. Whether she was then not allowed to leave, I didn't see any evidence for it. I mean, it's possible, but the thing with the Tower of Joy is that we don't have much information about what happened. Deliberately, George R. Martin has not told us. A lot of what we do have is Ned's fever dream, where we shouldn't take it literally. I think we can take some messages from the fever dream because there are some things which are reiterated in there, which makes us get a very clear impression about what happened. But there's nothing in Ned's memory, there's nothing in the fever dream, there's nothing in anything that anyone else said that suggests that. So is it possible? Yes. But I think that if Ned thought that, then the way he thought about Rhaegar would have been different. He thought highly of Rhaegar. We do see inside his mind. Question from where we're at. I'm sure I did get another one. Yeah, Jamie Mackey. I didn't see a question attached to that one. If there is one, then I will try and keep an eye out for it in the chat. The Lady Eternal saying, everyone knows that George R. Martin has drawn heavily on English royal history for A Song of Ice and Fire, especially the Wars of the Roses. Have you considered doing a video examining the parallels in detail? Yeah, I have done. And perhaps I will do at some point. I don't know how much interest there would be in that. But yeah, it's something I have considered doing on occasion. One thing I have also considered doing is getting a historian on, a historian who loves Song of Ice and Fire and just talking through it with them, because I think it would be great to have a expert on these kinds of things. So yeah, keep an eye out. That's certainly something that may well be coming down the line. Roman Lakovic saying, why has Leighton Hightower been so reclusive for such a long time? What is he up to? So this is Lord Hightower. And the Hightowers, as we know, are hugely influential, hugely powerful, rich, and he is allegedly a magic user. And yet the Hightowers, through A Song of Ice and Fire, have been quiet. Why is that? Well, the short answer, I think, is that the Hightowers are usually quiet. Now, we have the Dance of the Dragons. House of the Dragon, I think, is presenting this idea of the Hightowers engaging in Westerosi politics. That's not really the story that we have when we look through Fire and Blood and The World of Ice and Fire. Most of the time they don't. They seem happy staying in Old Town. They seem happy looking after their interests, perhaps working through the Faith of the Seven, the Maesters, actually actively going out and doing stuff. They more often than not, we see this 2, 3, 4 times in Fire and Blood and The World of Ice and Fire. They wait to see who's going to win, and then they go, "Welcome, come in. You can be here." Like with Aegon the Conqueror, they didn't charge out to challenge him. They waited, and then Aegon came towards Old Town, and they flung open the city gates and said, "Yeah, come in. We'll crown you. You can be king." Ditto, Maegor and Visenya flew there. The time the Faithful Seven were rabidly against Maegor, as well as Aegon the Uncrowned, the king he basically usurped, and Maegor flew Balerion there. And the night before he arrived, the High Septon was mysterious. Well, he mysteriously died, and then the new High Septon was a lot more welcoming and saying, "Okay, yeah, we're now on your side." So the Hightowers play a political game, but it's more let's wait and see, and then we'll react and do something. So that is the default mode for the Hightowers. What happened in the Dance of the Dragon, Dance of the Dragons, was different for them. That was a different idea. It may well have been Otto Hightower, who was not Lord Hightower, going out on a limb. The show are showing this very much a Hightower thing. That's slightly less clear in Fire and Blood. Yes, he got support from the Hightowers. Absolutely, he did. But it's not 100% clear that this was the Hightowers are pushing for this. So expect to see them acting quickly, swiftly, and strongly the moment that they need to. Jamie Mackey saying, thank you for your incredible insight. Oh, thank you. And many hours of entertainment. Why on earth would Book Bran, a 10-year-old werewood avatar, bother to become king? Assuming the others are defeated and the North is independent. I think I've got a question about Bran becoming king from one of my patrons, so I'll wrap that one up with this. The short answer, I think, is that at the moment he's definitely Bran. But when you get hooked up to the Weirwood network, from what we seem to see with Bloodraven, he becomes less just himself and more Weirwood networky. So if Bran becomes more a part of the network, it's not just Bran wanting to be king for himself. This is a matter of, does the Weirwood Network wish to have somebody placed on the Iron Throne who will be supportive of them? Yes, they may well want to do that. So, and this might actually be a second choice, because maybe if we get Bloodraven has been working to get Jon in place, the prince that was promised, that the working assumption may well be from Bloodraven, well, Jon can defeat the bad guys and then he can become king because he's the natural heir. But if Jon turns his back on that and leaves the Seven Kingdoms, heads north, which is happened on the show, but I think that's one of the things I'm most confident about happening in the books, then that might be then a great council. Who do we want to be king? And at that point, the Weirwood Network might go, well, actually, we'll have this guy. Martin S. saying, the banner of House Lannister looks very similar to the banner of Aslan in Narnia. Would be easy to confuse these two, to be honest. I don't think that was a deliberate thing on George R. R. Martin's part. Aslan obviously is a lion. The Lannisters are a lion. Yeah, they seem quite different. Let's look through that. People saying real world history would be interesting. So thank you. I will do something along those lines. Flopsy B saying, just a belated thank you for your selfless and generous contribution to Alzheimer's research and care, a truly worthy cause I care about. Thank you. Well, thank you. Yeah, for those who missed it, all of my live streams during both House of the Dragon and Rings of Power were charity live streams, and we were raising money for Alzheimer's care and research. And I said at the time, I'm blown away by people's generosity. So thank you so much. It is an exceptionally important cause. And actually, one, in case you missed the news, they have made a breakthrough actually just in the last few weeks. There's still a long way to go, but they have made a research breakthrough. So the money raised there is absolutely vital. This will change people's lives. So I'm really pleased about that. And next week, I shall do a quick advert for next week. Next week is my annual Christmas charity live stream, which is basically an open Q&A, slightly more relaxed. I will have on, I haven't invited anyone yet, but I'll have on a variety of, feel free to say who you think I should be inviting on, but probably a few other people I've collaborated with during the year. And we'll just throw a few questions around, and that will be a charity live stream. I haven't decided what that's going to be for, but I'll have a look around and see what feels like the right cause for that. We often raise quite a lot of money on those Christmas live streams. So that's what's happening next week, something hopefully to look forward to. Well, I'm thinking about actually just very swiftly, patrons, thank you so much. Always say thank you to my patrons. That's why I answer or prioritize questions that my patrons ask. I cannot do this without your support, so thank you. Moderators as well, thank you. You do an amazing job. And if you are watching this live, if you're in the chat, please show them a little bit of love, because they absolutely deserve it. Right, let's go to a question from just saying, more laid back. I expect you to pull out the tux just to throw us off, or reindeer ears, or maybe the IDG hat you can purchase at deepgeek.com shop one. Yes, absolutely. I don't know. Who knows what I shall wear? The one thing I've discovered today, which I wore last year, was, and I just started with the green screen. I put on a Christmas jumper, Christmas sweater for our American friends, and Christmas colours are red and green. And what you will find is that green against a green screen makes you completely invisible. So it amused me, I think, probably far more than any random people who stumbled across the live stream. But yeah, I will certainly work something vaguely festive. Creative Branches saying, hello there, hi there. Do you think Jamie knew about the Red Wedding when Roose Bolton let him go back to King's Landing? It's an interesting question. So, um, Roose Bolton was on the side of the Starks, and then obviously betrayed the Starks, and they they only discovered this at the Red Wedding. But this wasn't just a spur of the moment decision by Roose Bolton. He was thinking his way through this. And while Jamie was there at Town Hall, then Roose Bolton was in communication with Jamie's father, with Tywin. And that is what led to the Red Wedding, which has led, and you're not alone in asking this question, has led some people to speculate that maybe Jamie was aware of what was going to happen with the Red Wedding. And in particular, with the line from Roose Bolton when he's killing Rob on the show. I think he just said the Lannisters send their regards. In the book, it's Jamie Lannister sends his regards. And I picked up the quote because I just wanted to double check exactly what happened when Jamie leaves. This is what they say. Roose Bolton says, "You will give my warm regards to your father." And then Jamie responds, "So long as you give mine to Robb Stark, that I shall." Now, that's a slightly different emphasis to perhaps what you might. This wasn't Jamie saying, "Oh, and give my regards to Robb Stark." Wink, wink. This was prompted by Roose. Now, Jamie is not stupid. He was aware of the fact that Roose was playing with the idea of defecting. The fact that he let him go says a huge amount because Roose could have got so many sort of brownie points benefits there from the Starks if he'd taken Jamie and just taken him back up north and returned him to the Starks. That would have been fantastic for them, but he didn't. So Jamie clearly realized something was up. He clearly realized that his father was negotiating with Roose, but there's no hint that he knew exactly what was about to happen. J. Lord, hi there, saying the book Starks were a lot richer than the show Starks. Winterfell was much larger, and Ned was always wearing silk in King's Landing. So, what was Lord Eddard's tax policy? Well, that sounds like a video I should make. The Starks were the richest in the north. The Manderleys were probably the richest in the north. But the Starks were the top of basically a feudal tree in the north and were there for thousands of years. So the money filtered up. When you get a Winterfell, then you'll find that actually a lot of that, it was built out not just in one big time. They had huge amounts of money and they decided to build a massive castle. Winterfell was built over centuries, a bit here, a bit there. It's described as being on lots of different levels. So you're going into ground level somewhere, and then you come out and you're on the third floor um, without realizing it because the floor levels are different, and this building was built later than that building. It's a complex thing which was built over a long period of time, and it was also built in terms of sort of the money that flows up in the system. You had feudal economics is not trickle down; it's trickle up. That's the way it is, and so the people at the top get the money that comes up from everyone at the bottom, and if they cannot pay in cash, if they can't pay in corn or grain, they sometimes pay with labour. And one of the things, particularly during winter, Winterfell had this winter town just outside Winterfell, this town where people could come and shelter for the winter because the hot springs of Winterfell, this was a place where people get. And in order to sort of repay their debt, a lot of people would then be helping out the Starks, building stuff, repairing stuff. So The Starks were rich. Yes, of course they were. They were part of the 1%. They were the top family in the north. What was their tax policy? Probably pretty much the same as the rest of Westeros, to be fair. I was thinking about doing another one in that series, actually, incidentally, about the economics of the Dance of the Dragons. If people, it was a thing that I was pondering on a dog walk the other day, what the economics of the Dance of the Dragons were. That's the way my brain works. The Lady Eternal saying, I've lost track of the volumes of wonderful content you produce. Oh, thank you very much. Have you done a video or series about how you think the main plot line will be wrapped up over the Winds of Winter and the Dream of Spring? And if not, would you consider it? I mean, I don't know whether I've done a specific Winds of Winter / a Dream of Spring predictions video. Probably in lots of different places, but not all in one. Is the answer to that one? I've done a few speculations. I did ages ago. I did a character breakdowns, which led to thoughts on where a character might go. Those were, I say ages ago, those were probably like 5 years ago. One thing that I've been thinking of doing, and I probably will get around to doing at some point in the next year or two, is revisiting some of those really old videos and redoing them. First of all, I think I'm slightly better at making videos these days. But secondly, George R. R. Martin's has shifted over time with some of the hints he's been giving. We've obviously had the show, which doesn't tell us what's going to happen in the books, but there it does perhaps provide a few extra hints along the way. So I was wondering about going back and doing them, which maybe I will at some point. But as for where is the story going to end, I think I've said in a number of different places, but maybe, as I say, maybe I should just do one overall. Here's where I think the story's going. Video. Kaya Spinelli saying, in the Cushing Library archives for A Feast for Crows, this must be picking up from what somebody said a lot earlier in the chat. Georgia Martin says, glass candles can grant immortality. I don't know if it's still true. What are the implications of this? How might it work? I've not come across that, I have to say. Maybe that was an early draft from him. That's entirely possible. That immortality doesn't quite seem to fit with the George R. R. Martin. Well, they say magic requires sacrifice and intentionality, among other things. So just having a glass candle doesn't seem to work for that. So I don't know. Let me have a look at these things. I feel as if I'm talking about something I've not investigated thoroughly. So let me have a look at that, and I will try and come back to that perhaps next time. Second part to that, though, Kais Bellerin was saying, could this be related to Jamie's dream about flames? And so long as the flame lasts, the man whose life is bound to it cannot die. Yes, so that was his part of his dream that he had about him and Brienne, and he gets challenged by Cersei, and he gets challenged by Rhaegar and the members of the Kingsguard, and that vision dream is complicated. There's a lot of layers to it, so I'm trying to work out how I can sort of summarize it. But that is about the truth and honor, and where he is going to stand on all of that. So the flames within that represent a part of that, rather than I think linking across to glass candles. But I will look into the those library archives and see if there's anything there that I am missing. Let's go to some questions from well, just Aegon Dragonborn saying, you once made a video explaining the Faceless Men plan to use the dragons against the others, dealing with them later. Does the new tweaks to the Fire theme hint that they will succeed. I'm not entirely sure what you mean by the new tweaks to the Song of Ice and Fire theme. But the video about the Faceless Men's plan to use the dragons against the others. This was a video I did a long time ago, which maybe I should go back and have a look at again. But it starts from this point where we talk about the Faceless Men, and we think, and this is probably because it was the way we saw them in the show, as if they're just this cool group of assassins, and they have these really cool sounding catchphrases like "all men must die" and things like that. And when you read the books, it becomes apparent that that's the assassin thing is just an offshoot of their religion. And "all men must die, all men must serve" is not just a cool catchphrase. This is an article of faith for them. Everyone must die. Their faith is about death. It's a death cult. Everybody must die. People come into their temple in order to end their lives. If you wish to end someone's life, you can hire a faceless man to go and do it. That means that what we've got here is people who think that death is part of the natural order of things. Everyone must die. If you suddenly find that you've got a world where they look around and that is not happening, because death is no longer the end, because you've got this whole army of the dead, is that people get killed but come back. They are going to want to stop this, not just as a hey, it will be good to stop this, but they think this is heresy. They will think what Qyburn is doing down in King's Landing is heresy. They will think that what Priest of Law doing, what happened to Beric Dondarrion, is heresy. All men must die. You should not cheat the god of death. So what will they be doing? This ties into the question of what they're doing down in Oldtown. They're trying to learn something, trying to figure something out. How might they try and oppose the others? Well, perhaps through dragons. Perhaps they would allow dragons to be destroying the others, and then get rid of the dragons. So it's a thing that it's a theory. I haven't probably explained that one particularly well, but that's sort of a working theory that I had. Philip Road, thank you very much for the super chat. I didn't see a question attached to that. If there was one, do drop it into the chat. Aegon Dragonborn saying, I meant the new meaning that Aegon's prophecy added to the A Song of Ice and Fire theme. Oh, okay. So with Aegon's prophecy, does this impact on the Faceless Men? I'm not 100% sure. I think what this means is that there are lots of people who now have got different motivations to get rid of, oppose the others. So that would be what I'd say. I don't think this shifts that at all. What it means is that the Faceless Men could discover about the Prince Promised and say, okay, well, maybe that's the way that they get destroyed. The Faceless Men are not just cool assassins; they have got a political agenda, so that's where I would go with that. So, is there a link there? Possibly, but we've not yet seen it. Martin S. saying George R. R. Martin does not use the authority grants ass-kicking trope as much as many other franchises. If he did, almost all the greatest warriors would be from House Targaryen. It's probably a good thing. Yeah, so he doesn't. George R. R. Martin is very. Well, he doesn't preach with his writing, but he does show the results of what happens. Now, I've been doing quite a bit of thinking about Maegor recently, as I said, and we're not told this was bad on Maegor's part, what he did, but we get shown what happens, and that should impact on us and make us go, so what? He just murdered hundreds of innocent people there. That's clearly wrong. We should be feeling that, and so we should be thinking, Yeah, he deserved being called Maegor the Cruel. That's one of the titles of one of those videos I'm going to be doing. How cruel was Maegor? Because there are a lot of people you'll find saying there were probably crueler kings, there were worse kings. I think George R. R. Martin wants us to see Maegor going through his life and see quite how bad he was, and he wants us to make that decision rather than have it forced down our throats. Let's go to a question from Scott Moraldo saying, good morning, evening here. I just watched your What If the Long Night Never Happened video from a few years ago, which I had to go back and check. I have to say, that was a conversation I did with Secrets of the Citadel, I think about 4 years ago. Knowing that George R. R. Martin revealed quite a bit to the Game of Thrones showrunners, and also that they designed some of their content to at least echo or nod to the way that things will end up in books, how likely do you think it is that some element like that is actually incorporated into the story through Bran? It seems a very George R. R. Martin-like irony for Bran to be the source of all these prophecies in the first place. And since the show certainly nodded to the idea that he can affect the past from the present, I wonder if that might have been Dan and Dave nodding at something George R. R. Martin told them about the conclusion of the story. Okay. I will answer this, I think, by going through the history of George R. R. Martin, talking about how his story relates to what we saw on the TV show. He started out, I think, thinking that this was his story was going to be put on the TV, which season 1 it was. There's very little doubt about that. It was a very faithful adaptation, season 1 in particular. Seasons 2, 3, and 4, they made some changes. They excluded some elements. They squashed a couple of characters together, but very broadly speaking, it was still a relatively faithful adaptation. At which point George R. R. Martin left. He decided he'd been involved, not heavily involved. He had written an episode for each of the first 4 seasons, and he had been there as a sort of a sounding board for the showrunners. But from season 5 onwards, he departed. He wasn't involved. He wasn't involved at all. And between seasons 4 and 5, he had what we would probably call a handover meeting. They all met up for a few days and talked through what he was planning for the rest of the story. Now, we're told that they went through all of the fates of the main characters. We're told that there were 3 WTF moments that he came up with. The hold the door moment was one of them. Shireen's murder was another, and I'm not sure if they ever finally confirmed it, but the Bran King was the third. And they didn't cover all of the final fates of some of the minor characters, but he left them with this understanding of where he was and where he thought this was going to end, and then went off to write. Obviously, he hasn't finished writing it yet, but that's what the plan was at the time. When we got to before season 8, he obviously was asked lots of times, how is this your story? Is this how your story is going to end? And he said a few things. He did a blog post. You can still find it if you don't come back that far. And he asked himself the question. He said, is this going to be the same ending as of The Song of Ice and Fire? Yes and no, and yes and no, and yes and no. He then sort of went on to explain what he meant by that. He said, the big beats of the story will be the same, but obviously there's the butterfly effect from things they left out early on. They didn't have Fagon, they didn't have Lady Stoneheart, so that impacts hugely later on, so the story will be different. But some of this will be echoed in what happens in the books. Then when we got to, really it's the last year, has slightly changed the emphasis of that, and he's come out of his shell a little bit more. I suspect this is more to do with the fact that he's been more involved with House of the Dragon and he's feeling more bought into this again. And he's perhaps learned a few lessons from how this worked with Game of Thrones. And he did, I'm going to say 6 months or so ago, he did another very extensive blog post where he seems to be trying to warm people up to the idea that what happens in the books is not what happened on the show. And he reiterated a lot of the same things. He said, I've got lots of characters here that weren't on the show. We've got lots of storylines that weren't on the show, and things will be different. And the emphasis was very clear that he wanted people to think that this was going to be different to what they saw on the TV show. There will be some things, still there will be some things which will be either the same or substantively the same. He didn't use that exact word. I can't remember the exact word he used, but basically saying that will happen in a different context. So an example of this, and I'm not saying this is because he's not this is an example, but this is the way I understand it, is Jaime and Cersei dying together. I think that makes perfect sense in the books for Jaime and Cersei to die at the same time. There's lots of foreshadowing for it. We entered the world at the same time, we shall leave it at the same time. That kind of makes sense that they will die at the same point. Are they going to die with rubble falling on their heads from the Red Keep? Probably not. But they probably will die together. Now, that's the kind of thing we're getting. So all of the story leading up to that point may be very different, but that will remain the same. So with all of that as a kind of a preamble, he then also said, and just to remind you, I'm a garden writer. And when he writes, he changes things. He basically said, as I was writing, I just had this sudden thought about how a character's story will reach its end, which I will do in A Dream of Spring. That he just had come to him completely. So we're left in the situation with that. What we saw in Game of Thrones, the TV show, was based on a conversation that had happened with George R. R. Martin, that we already know, even at the time, they were not going to be presenting what he had said to them because they changed things earlier on. And they have certainly contracted things as they were going along. And to add to all of this, George R. R. Martin has basically said, and since I had that conversation with you, I've changed my mind on a few things. So we can't take what happened with at the end of Game of Thrones as categorically in any way what's going to happen. There will be some elements. George R. R. Martin, again, he is clear there are some elements which you are going to see on the show. And so there are some things that, like I've said, I think Jon Snow going north of the wall at the end makes perfect sense from the arc that I think he's going to go into as a character. I think Jaime and Cersei dying together makes perfect sense to me for where their character arcs go. That kind of thing. But all of the other stuff, perhaps not. Which is a huge preamble to come to your question about whether or not the idea that Bran might have that video that I did ages ago with Gemma. I think it was her idea actually. Was what if the legends we have of the Long Night were actually Bran remembering what happened during the story of A Song of Ice and Fire, and then going back in time with his time travel powers, and then telling those stories way back in time, and then they become the legends, which we, in the timeline of A Song of Ice and Fire, then have the legends of the Long Night. That's how they've come back to us, thus creating this kind of closed time loop idea, which is something George R. R. Martin does seem to be using in this. I think I think at the time I came to the conclusion that was a really good and interesting idea, but I didn't think it was quite right, and I think I would still hold to that. It does I do like the idea. Definitely Bran will influence the past at some point in the story. That he has done already, but in such small ways that make you think this is foreshadowing for something bigger happening. So, um, that is gonna happen, but this idea of all of the legends we have because there is an echo of them in the present story, that is because someone's gone back into the past. That makes this more of a time travel story than I think that George R. R. Martin has ever even hinted it's going to be. Right, so let's go to pick up some questions in the chat. I think I saw a couple going by. Um, yep, I had one from Callie Summers saying, realistic or tinfoil? George R. R. Martin told Dan and Dave a lot of the general things he planned, but the negative reactions to the show are influencing the extended Winds of Winter. Um, well, has his writing been affected by the show? Yes, it has been affected by the show, but I think that it was more affected by the show in the early years of when the show was on, rather than in the aftermath of it. That's my understanding of. Um, I think Preston Jacobs. I've not seen this video, but plenty of people have told me about it. Preston Jacobs did an analysis of all the things that George R. Martin has said about what he's written and when, and come to the conclusion, which feels about right, which is for the first 6, 7 years. Then after Dance with Dragons, then actually he didn't write much. He got a few things done, but maybe a few hundred pages. The vast majority of what he's written is has been in these last few years, particularly during COVID lockdown. So the year, whichever year it was, 2020, I lose track now. The year of proper COVID lockdown, when George R. R. Martin had locked himself in his mountain cabin. He described himself as having written hundreds and hundreds of pages. This was in addition to having the previous year written hundreds of pages. So hundreds and hundreds implies to me 500 maybe. If he'd written the previous year hundreds, that's another couple of hundred. He'd had 200-300 written beforehand. That kind of takes him up to where he is now. So um, yes, he seems to have got unlocked by the end. His writing muse has been unlocked by the end of the show. So my take is not that he has had problems because of the ending of Ice and Fire. Ending of Game of Thrones. He had problems while it was on, and I do have sympathy. As on a very human level, this is an odd thing for a writer to see that, and I think it's a unique thing. It has been put to him a couple of recent interviews. You've got some people, like say the Harry Potter stories. J.K. hadn't finished writing them when the first movie came out, but by the time the last movies came out, that had been written. So she never saw on screen something which she had not already written her version of. George R. R. Martin was seeing things on screen that he had not yet written, and that is an almost unique situation for a writer, certainly for a writer in his situation. And that has to have been quite hard for him to process and work his way through. And yeah, I don't think it's tinfoil at all to suggest that that has to have impacted on him. Seeing something on screen that you've been thinking about and planning about for ages and thinking, did that work? Your brain will have to have gone through that process. Um, but all the evidence we've got on when he has been doing writing suggests that the slow bit of writing the Winter was the first 6, 7 years. The faster bit has been the last 3 or 4 years. Let's go to a question from Diego Godoy saying, "Hola, Robert. Hola. I've been meaning to ask, what is your favourite song, with or without lyrics, or music that has come out of Game of Thrones and House of the Dragon? My personal favourite is the song Jenny of Oldstones, sung by Podrick in season 8. Well, I thought that was excellent, I have to say. The one, the other one, which has really impacted me, other than the title sequence, we take it for granted nowadays, but that was such a good um, uh, title music. But the one that really got me, it's season 6, I think, episode 10. Um, when Cersei blows up the Great Sept, if you can just picture the scene, there's pretty much no dialogue, and you just get this really slow build up to it. And we see her there in the Red Keep, and she's there sipping her wine, and Tommen is about to go, gets stopped from going, and then we see in the Great Sept we get Marjorie, who's getting increasingly agitated. Why isn't Cersei here? That build up, the music that they had there, there's a name for the theme that they had there. I thought that was absolutely completely carried that scene, because it could have not worked, but it worked perfectly because the music built up the tension as we were going through. So yeah, for me, uh, that was a real high point. Um, and Philip Elsie saying, "Well, the dude is crawling towards the wildfire pool with candles." Yeah, absolutely. The Light of the Seven. Thank you very much, Philip Alamov. That's what it's called. That bit of music. Fred Versteeg saying, "Hello, Robert. A question about magic. When the Faceless Men put on a mask, they become the dead person. As if the dead person is walking into the Faceless Man or woman, but without control. It's a weird mirror of walking." Now, here is my question. Arya killed the Night King on the TV show, and of course, there's no Night King in the books. But is it possible that her training made her able to kill a walker with a Valyrian steel dagger, then take his face and infiltrate the White Walkers? Will this magical ability make her essential in defeating the White Walkers? Arya and Bran both seem to offer a lot of their humanity to save mankind and their family. Now, that's a great tragedy. Well, it is a great tragedy. Um, uh, I think I don't think of the way that taking on the face works quite like that. That for me, there's an element here of what Qyburn said. Um, Qyburn is perhaps not a character that we would admire, but he does seem to have understood one of the central concepts of how this world operates. He tells this story. I've said this before, so apologies if you've heard this from me before, but he tells this story to Jamie when he's trying to explain. He says, "Imagine you're in a room and there's just a chair in the room, and there's an indentation on the chair, and there's a smell of perfume in the air. And you can tell that just before you came into the room, there was a woman sat on that chair. But she's not there, but something is of her." And that's what he sees as being the central concept of what's going on here. Something lingers after death. And we see that across the piece. When Beric Dondarrion dies, he comes back, he loses a bit of himself. Something of him lingers. Similarly, Stoneheart, something lingers. And so he is trying to capture that something that lingers. Taking that across to the Faceless Men, when Arya, she has this face put on her, there's blood, which is a sacrifice. This is blood magic of a kind, and she experiences something of that person. Um, that's the something that lingers. In my mind, that's what's going on there. Is that the magic of the Faceless Men has been to capture the something that lingers in that face that they then put on. So that seems to be what's going on. Might she then play a role in defeating the others? Well, I suspect she may play a role, but it's not going to be the role, obviously, the role that she played on the show. But the showrunners on the TV show were very clear. They made up that bit. They thought, who do we want to kill the Night King? Let's make it Arya. it's very clear that yes, her character arc must lead somewhere. Um, Her character arc is about two clear things. It's about identity of who she is, and it's about killing. So revenge. So where might that lead? Well, it will lead to her completing her list. Would it lead to her killing the head other? I personally don't think so. She had the Valyrian steel dagger on the show because she was given it. In the books, she hasn't been given it. She's very much focused on needles still in the books. The Lady Eternal saying theory. Cersei believes that she and Jaime will die together because of her narcissism, and Jaime because of her dominance in their relationship. In George R. R. Martin's writing, the announced plan never comes off, so Jaime will outlive Cersei in the story. Yeah, it's an interesting. I like the theory. It's a good theory. As with all of these things, George R. R. Martin does like to. He's admitted this. He's quite a mischievous writer. He does enjoy catching people by surprise, and this is one thing. Actually, linking back up to the earlier question, this is one thing that does make me wonder. May have been an impact of the TV show is that I suspect there will be at least something where he's going to consciously or subconsciously rely on us expecting what happened on the TV show to happen, and actually he's going to do something completely different because he enjoys getting us or catching us unawares. He liked the Red Wedding, for example, because we weren't expecting it. Yes, if you'd read through the books and gone through the fine detail, that perhaps you might expect something like that to happen, but the exactly what happened, no, you weren't going to get that. So he likes this catching people by surprise. So might this be one of the things? Possibly. It's more likely that it's one of the bigger things that is that happened at the end of the show. I do like your thinking that the reasons why they both believe that that is the case, that she believes it because of her narcissism, he believes it because of her dominance in the relationship, kind of makes sense. And George R. R. Martin does like overturning or twisting people's beliefs. So uh, he does like it though for the things to happen in a way that perhaps they're not expecting. So without saying this is what's going to happen, something like a murder suicide would work for that. That will actually um, twist both of their expectations. Is that they think that they're going to end their lives together, and that's in a sort of a good way because their fates are drawn together. But actually, maybe one of them is going to force it, and if one of them does, it's probably more likely to be Jaime. Martin S. Can a dragon in George R. R. Martin's world at all be slain by a human without using another dragon? Is there any known Turin, Turambar, Erendil, or Bard the Bowman equivalent feat, or is that simply impossible? Yes, so it does happen. So this happens a couple of times that we know of. The obvious one is Rhaenys, one of the conquerors down in Dawn. Her dragon gets shot down, and that is the way to do it. It seems to be. They don't say exactly what it is, but this the throat, the eyes. There are soft areas on a dragon. Obviously, when we think about dragons, we think of Smaug with soft underbelly and things like that. That it is possible to shoot down a dragon. This is why people keep on doing it. The other example of where that happens will probably be coming up in season 2 of House of the Dragon. So yes, you can. The majority of dragons are killed by other dragons. Valyrian dies of old age, but most of them die from other dragons attacking them. think that's me caught up in the chat. Let's go to a question from Matthew Hawkins. Could you clarify for us if Sir Shadrich recognised Sansa Stark in the Vale, and with who do his true allegiances lie with? Littlefinger, Varys, or Qyburn? Okay, so this is the book-only character. He's a guy, basically a sellsword, but he's kind of down on his luck. He joins up with Stannis in the Battle of the Blackwater. They obviously lose. He loses status, money, and he basically then heads out on the road trying to make a bit of cash. He's hunting for Sansa. He knows that Sansa's lost and out there. He runs into Brienne. Brienne is also hunting for Sansa, and he figures out that she is, and she tries to pretend she isn't. And so he sort of kind of like tags along for a little while, but we find him again in the Vale. Littlefinger has hired some sellswords in the Vale, and so he comes face to face. It's introduced in the last, I think it was Sansa chapter we have of the main story, and again he meets her in a lane, the pre-release chapter for Winter. Now, does he know it's her? She's not introduced to Sansa there. She's introduced as Littlefinger's legitimate daughter, Elaine, and there is no hint. There's nothing in what he says or does that suggests that he knows who she is. But because he's hunting for her, there is the prospect. And because of the fact that he, although he does seem to be quite a, I was going to say a slimy character. That's probably not the wrong way of saying it, but he's quite wily. We miss the fact that he does seem to be quite perceptive and quite intelligent. And he figured out what was going on with Brienne, for example. So there's a chance that he might figure this one out. I don't think he has yet. Now, the 3 times he met her very briefly when they first arrived there. Then he bumps into her, I think quite literally, but in the pre-release chapter for Winds of Winter, literally bumps into her in the Eyrie, and then he dances with her at this sort of ball thing that's going on. Now, could those things suggest that perhaps he knows? It's possible, but nothing he says there seems to suggest that he does know. So this is more one to keep an eye on. This is the kind of thing where we go, okay, so maybe if somebody missteps, if she forgets to dye her hair, something like that, maybe he will figure something out. But at the moment, my guess is probably no. Flopsy B saying, if Jamie does hold truths too complex to bear, he has at least told some to Catelyn. Might meeting LS stir him to speak his honourable identity aloud? So LS, I'm just having a mind blank on who LS is here. I will come back to that. Somebody in the chat will point out who LS is, I'm sure. Lisa Dennis, Venus is both the morning star and the evening star. It's the sort of the morning or evening title, less about what you've done and about when you hold dawn. Interesting. So the Sword of the Morning is the title given to the member of House Stone who holds the sword Dawn. And when Darkstar claims it, he is being the Sword of the Evening. There was a previous Sword of the Evening, I think, back in House Stone history. Is it more about when you hold the sword? I think it's My instinct is no here. I mean, I really like the thinking here, but it's this doesn't seem to be about Venus. This seems to be about the Sword of Dawn, and when is the right time? When is it right? When the right person is holding Dawn is morning. Because dawn is the morning. Um, Dawn should not be in the evening. So, being the sword of the evening, that's not dawn. So with Darkstar having it, then I think that we're probably going to end up being um, told through the language that this is not right. Somebody else has to be having this. Oh, Lady Stoneheart, thank you. Yes, I knew I would. That there would be people who pick this up. So, question, Flopsy B, apologies. If Jamie does hold through too complex to bear, he has at least told some to Catelyn. Might meeting Lady Stoneheart stir him to speak his honourable identity aloud? Possibly. The problem is that Lady Stoneheart does not equal Catelyn. Now, she seems to have, as far as we can see, going back to this idea of something lingers. What is it that lingers of a person? It seems to be the things that they are holding dear, the things that are driving them, the things that are clinging on to this mortal coil. So with Beric, he loses lots of different things, memories, uh, but he still retains hold of this drive and desire to be doing what's right, upholding some kind of noble ideal. He's not a perfect person by any means, but he holds on to what it was that was driving him when he died. Catelyn, her last memories are of what happened at the Red Wedding. And so, what was there driving her at the moment was this need for revenge. And that is what lingered with her. And she was dead for a longer period than Beric was. And so, more of the rest of her is gone. And all that is left, as far as we can tell, is this drive for revenge. So, when Jamie meets Lady Stoneheart, which we will presumably see early on in the Winds of Winter, will that be a meeting of minds picking up from where they were before? No, I don't think so at all. I think this is going to be very. I think that he will, first of all, he will be feeling duped by Brienne, which he will have been, unless something happens off camera we're unaware of that she like tells him the truth, and um, he will arrive, and then it'll become apparent that Brienne brought him there under false pretenses, and he will see that this was Catelyn, but he will not be picking up on that conversation he had before. She will be accusatory. Basically saying, I released you in order to get my daughters, find my daughters. Where are my daughters? He'll be, I didn't find them. I had to pass this on to Brienne, and she hasn't done it either. So it's going to be a lot more accusatory than we would expect. Question from Philip Rode saying, what is the fate or point of Jalabar Joe? He seems like just an oddity, but he's mentioned so often that he seems like he's been set up for something. It's a good question, and this is one I will pick up on next week, I think. I always do this one or two every time that it's just I could give you a flannel answer. I don't think that one. So I will pick up on that one and answer that one next time, if that is okay. Yul Elson, thank you very much for the super sticker. That's a jumping team leader, I think that is. Thank you very much for that. The Skidu Rita just saying, apologies if this is a stupid question. It won't be, I'm sure. But do you think George based the Andals on the Anglo-Saxons' Jute and Frisian migration and invasion of Britain? Yes, a bit, perhaps. I mean, a lot of. I don't think he said exactly, but the thing about the Andal invasion is that this wasn't a whole load of people coming in one go, landing and just trying to take over the continent. This took place over 1,000 years or so. So it was just this every few years, more boats of people, of fighters, of settlers arrived. And that just happened over such a long period of time that this wave just could not be stopped. Now, if you're thinking about waves, then we have to immediately think about Canute, who was there when talking about the Vikings. He's saying, legendary story, he put the chair in front of the tide and sat in it as king, which has now been often handed down as a story of what a foolish king, he could not hold back the tide, but this was the exact point he was trying to make. You cannot hold back the tide. It will just keep on coming. It will keep on coming. And that is the feeling. So might that be with the Anglo-Saxons and the Jutes and the like? I know less about the Jutish invasion. That was before. I think that was before even the Roman invasion. The Jutes came across into the southeast of England. But the Anglo-Saxons, yes, this was definitely over a long period of time that they just sort of slowly came and took over. So I don't think he specifically has name-checked that as inspiration, but possibly. Let's go with a question from Mike McFly. Do you think George R. R. Martin's gardening style has hurt him in the long run for the A Song of Ice and Fire series? I know he had an outline but then expanded from 3 books to 5 to 7. Do you think either his outline has changed slightly or he watered the garden so much that he doesn't know how to get back on track with the story? Well, I guess a combination of both, maybe. Well, this one, I talked a little bit about this earlier, so I won't just add too much here. But has it worked against him in terms of the size of the story he's telling? Yes, absolutely. Thought he was just telling a 3-book story. Turns out it's at least a 7-book story, a big 7-book story. And that's because of his gardener style. If he had mapped it out at the beginning and stuck to that, then probably it would have stayed a much smaller story. Is this hurting him? I mean, I think that this has been what created this story that we love. The reason why we're all here talking about it is that it has allowed him to expand it out. If this was just a really small, tight, concise story, it may be a great story, but it wouldn't have all of the levels that we can talk our way through here. So it's certainly slowed him down, but I don't think that it's made for a worse bit of art, if that kind of makes sense. Username redacted saying Targaryens would be Normans. Yeah, he has made that specific kind of relationship. He has talked about Aegon the Conqueror as being like William the Conqueror, who was the head of the Normans who came in 1066 and all that, and invaded. So that was very much, and they were of a technological level higher than the Saxons who were there at the time. They great horsemen, the Normans. Not just, and they're fascinating, but it's complete digression here. But if you ever get a chance, that have a look at the Normans, because it's certainly in England we tend to be taught that they were in Normandy and north of France, and they came and invaded England, and that's it. But they started off in Scandinavia. They spread out all across Europe. They ended up being an elite force in Russia, lots of different places. So they're a fascinating group of people. Shasha. Hi, Robert. Hope you're well. I am. Thank you very much. A question. If Littlefinger did indeed hire Jack and Hagar to kill Ned, what did he have to pay? He seems to be familiar with their price for a merchant. He doesn't dare to think about that for a princess. A lord and former hand would fit quite neatly between those categories, yet he seems neither very much impoverished, pardon me, nor the type of person who is willing to give something up. Did he maybe not have to pay at all after the job was rendered moot by ice? Yeah, so this is my working hypothesis of why Jack and Hagar was in the Black Cells. Um, he was hired to kill Ned. Now, I did a video on this. I'm not going to go through all of the detail, but basically, Littlefinger could not allow Ned to survive. There's no way for it. All of his plans would just completely fall down if Ned got out and said, "And that Littlefinger betrayed me." That would end everything. He would, because his plans are not just about I wish to climb the ladder and be more powerful. This was focused in on Cat because he was obsessed with Cat. So the moment Ned told Cat what happened, Cat would be completely against him, and that would stop all of his plans. So he had to kill Ned. The way he did it, as far as we can tell, was by whispering in Joffrey's ear and putting the idea in Joffrey's ear, and that's why Joffrey changed from the plan, which was to send Ned up, to chopping his head off. But Littlefinger couldn't be sure that Joffrey was going to do that. So my working hypothesis is that Jack and Hagar was there because Littlefinger had hired him or was about to hire him to kill Ned Stark. Could he afford it? I think the answer is yes. One thing we find about Littlefinger is that he can find the money from somewhere. He's the accountant extraordinaire that we have in A Song of Ice and Fire. He can always find money for something. Everybody always says he can always find money for this. He just has to sort of get a loan out there, move some figures from this column to that column. It'll all be okay. So him finding the money with access to his own personal fortune, which he did make when basically he was in charge of the port of Gulltown, with all the excise duties and things like that. This is how he got noticed and got brought in to become the Master of Coin in King's Landing. Because he was doing such a good job there, he increased the amount of money which they made there, and no doubt he earned money off the top of it. He has an extensive property portfolio and business portfolio within King's Landing. He can afford this. So I think that the affordability is not the issue there for Littlefinger. But my best guess is probably he hadn't actually hired them to do it yet, because he just hired them to kill him if he leaves the city. Mike S saying that's more of what I meant with that Patreon question about his watering the garden, George Martin watering the garden, and maybe forgetting about putting gas in the mower, so he's just letting it grow. So I don't think he is. I think he's just seeing more shoots. The only time I would get concerned about him is if I talked about we've reached the extent of the story and it now has to come back in again. If at the end of the Winds of Winter the story's still getting bigger, that's going to be a problem, because he has to bring it all back in again. So I think my take is that yes, this has created more work for himself, but I think it's all on track still. Let's go. Nigel Milliken saying, "Hi Rob, what is life for Howland Reed compared to the other lords on his level? Is he closer to a common person than the lord?" Well, what's life like for him? He is a lord, and he is the lord of Crannock Men. We do not know much about the Crannock Men, is the honest answer. To the extent that we know the names of 4 Crannock Men, and those are the 4 in his family. We don't know the names of any of the ones before him. We have lots of stories about how they live, and it does seem a very simple lifestyle. They live off the land. They don't do trading with other people, so it is a lot. It's hard to see how he could be living this lavish lifestyle compared to everyone else. And indeed, his children, who we see, do not seem to have grown up in great splendor. They seem to certainly get Mira seems to be a hunter, really. And if that's what appears to be heir to the lordship does, then that does seem to imply that he lives the a life which is closer to that of his people than, say, Ned Stark did. Ned Stark lived a very privileged life, very different to everybody else in the North. But um, Howland Reed doesn't seem to. Um, so yeah, daily life for him is probably a lot more egalitarian. I think where I'm coming round to actually, probably um, the Cranagmain society is a lot more egalitarian and equal than the other parts, or most of the other parts of the Seven Kingdoms. Let's go to a question from Mike McFly. What do you think was going to happen to Dany if George R. Martin had her go to Ashai like he originally thought? I'm sure some aspects were spread across the story in different ways, but do you think it might really impact and change the fundamental parts of her story that much from what he originally imagined? I'm sure whatever he planned for her at the end was, as an idea, will stay the same, but what do you think about how she will get there? So, for those who are unaware, his plan originally was that Dany would go um, over to Ashai, and after Karth, she would go east. You see hints of this with Quaithe saying to go west, you must go east, things like that. And she's there saying, I need to go to Ashai. Is that what it is? Because that's what is east. And why? Well, there were two reasons. Firstly, because she was going to get knowledge there. Um, Secondly, because George R. R. Martin, at one point in his planning, he had thought to have a 5-year gap, a 5-year break in this story, where all of the main characters could just age up a little bit. The dragons could get bigger. He eventually abandoned that idea, but what it does mean is that if you start digging through the weeds, then you can see where some characters were going to be left. Well, Dany was going to be in the Shire for 5 years. She was going to be there, well away from everybody and the rest of the story. She was going to be learning stuff, and when she would emerge from there, she was going to have 3 large-ish dragons that could potentially be ridden, and then she would head west. So that was the plan. Now, how's this changed? The fact that he changed his mind on this, how has this shifted her story? I think it means that the information she's going to get is going to come from different places. So some of it is going to come from Tyrion. Tyrion is the dragon expert. He is literally on the Shy Maid. He was literally writing a book about dragons. He is going to be a person who is going to teach her about dragon riding, about how to control her dragon, but how to sort of bring up her dragon, how to get the bond going. All of the bits of information that we are slowly starting to pick up from House of the Dragon, that's the kind of stuff he's going to be able to pass on to her. So she's going to get that bit of information going on there. Some of the things that Quaithe has been sort of dropping into the to Dany in terms of what she's um, who she needs to be looking out for, the kind of more magical, mystical elements of this. I suspect a lot of that would have happened in Ashai. So I think that she gets a lot of the same knowledge, but from slightly different places. Also, Mokoro, he's obviously was the character on the show, but he has been sent by the leadership of the Faith of the Law to go to be with her. Similarly, Marwyn the Mage has decided to go to be with her. They are going to be teaching her about the Azor Ahai Reborn. Marwyn's going to be teaching her about magical stuff. These are things she's going to learn, but not in abstract over in Ashai. We're actually going to see her learn things from people. So I think, to summarize that, is this going to change the story? No. It does mean the extended stay she's got in Slaver's Bay has allowed more of a character development. And we will also see the learning that she gets over a slightly more extended timescale. Martin, LS just asking, is Quaithe Shearer Sea Star? I think I've done a video on this one, but my answer is yes. The reasons that she can speak Westerosi, that she is magical, and she is wanting Dany to embrace her Targaryen nature. All of that makes Shearer Sea Star seem quite likely. And then we've got a balance issue going on here. We've got two prime characters for who is the Princess Promised, Azor Ahai Reborn. Jon, who is being championed, though he doesn't know it, by Bloodraven, and Dany, who is being championed, though she doesn't really know it, by Quaithe. If it turns out that we've got Bloodraven and Shearer Sea Star, who were lovers, who were close, but they did not, who will have come to the same understanding about Princess Promised, Azor Ahai Reborn, but she heads over to Essos and he stays in Westeros. If they decide, if they pick, pardon me, if they pick different champions that and don't realize until they come back together in Westeros, that will be, I think, amazing. Anyway, Martinez. Maybe this has been asked before, but from the show, it appears as if Arya could have altered events massively and possibly helped her family by naming Tywin Lannister to die from Captain Stark. Yeah. And in the books, she does have a little bit of buyer's remorse and go, well, why on earth didn't I name people? I could have done a whole lot more here. She's just a child, so it's kind of understandable. But yeah, absolutely, 100%. She could have made a huge difference if she had, as you say, if she'd asked for the murder of Tywin Lannister and I don't know, some other person, Cersei maybe, then it would have made a big difference. But she didn't do that, and I think she regretted it at the time. Question from Mike McFly. People complained a lot about how quickly things happened in the show, but I'm really wondering if in the books Arya will have enough actual in-story time in the House of Black and White to be a kid assassin and learn enough skills in fighting to make a huge impact later on in the story, primarily because of her age and size. Is this just a way to get a storyline to find her love of being a Stark again, or a combination of both? Well, this is another one of those things where when you start digging into the weeds, this is probably where George R. R. Martin would have left Arya for 5 years when he was planning this 5-year break. And in that 5 years, she could have trained to be a kick-ass assassin. As it is, the main purpose of Arya being there, I think you're absolutely right, from a narrative perspective, is not for her to become a kick-ass assassin, but for her to re-embrace her identity. She has pardon me, I've still got the remnants of a cough from a cold a couple of weeks ago, but so apologies for that. But her story, right from early on, it's about identity. She gets so many different names going all the way through the story, and by the end of book one, then she's immediately there, being told that she's Harry, she's not Arya, she's a boy, not a girl. She doesn't know the Starks. She has to be somebody completely different, and she has to live this completely different identity. And then we go through all the way through the time in Harrenhal. She's got 3 different names she has going on there. When she gets to the House of Black and White, then she has to become no one. This is the ultimate point of this story, is that to try and lose her identity, but she will not. She will remain a Stark and she will head back. So that is the main point there. She will learn some skills, absolutely, and they will be useful. absolutely. But from a character arc, this is about identity, and it will feed into her revenge arc as well. I'm pretty sure on that. Um, Andrew Case saying, if you look at Arya's training so far and the Mercy chapter, we see the tactics Arya will use: deception, manipulation, etc. Not the super soldier ninja assassin like the show. Yeah, I think I would agree with that. That's she is getting assassin spy skills, but it's not kind of a fighter type. Yeah, I think that's a good observation. Caius Ballerina picking up a question for Aidan Butler. Do you think Victarion will make it to Daenerys? And if he does, how do you see their relationship working out? Or Batley for Victarion? Um, so Victarion, for those who missed what George R. R. Martin has said about him, to remind you if you can't remember, so he's the Greyjoy who has been sent by Euron over to Meereen to collect Daenerys for Euron. Euron wants to marry her and he wants her dragon, so he's there with a mind to. He's got Dragonbinder. He's going to control the dragons and take Dany back. But he thinks, I'm going to outsmart Euron. I'm going to take the dragons for myself and claim Dany for myself. George R. R. Martin describes Victarion as thick as a stump. He is not going to do this. He is not going to outsmart Euron, nor is he going to outsmart Mokoro. Mokoro is on his ship. Mokoro is there specifically having been sent in order to help Dany. He is not going to help Victarion steal the dragon. In fact, by the time, yes, Victarion will come in and his arrival will help save Meereen against the armies that are besieging it. But he is he's not going to last long. He probably will survive until Dany gets back. But the moment she discovers that he's trying to take her dragons, maybe he will get as far as getting that Dragonbinder blown, and maybe Euron would have outsmarted him and got the dragon himself. If Dany finds out that he is trying to get her dragons, I think we know what will happen to him. So their relationship is not long for this world. Let's put it that way. Question from Shasha. Why is Lord Merryweather so nervous about the Blue Bard when dining with Cersei? He can't possibly foresee what is about to happen. Does he see himself getting the reins of Castamere sung at while being red-wedded? Has he already planned to escape or some other treason in court? So Lord Merryweather is an interesting character. He is the son, I think, of the grandson, son of a previous Lord Merryweather who had been Hand of the King to Aerys II, the Mad King. And he had not done a great job and got exiled. And the Merryweathers lost their lands, but our Lord Merryweather manages to persuade Robert Baratheon to give him a bit of land back, and he can come back to Westeros. It wasn't him; it was his dad. That's all in the past. While he was off in Essos, he got himself an exotic foreign wife, Tiana Merryweather, and they come to court to King's Landing. She becomes Cersei's lover, and he is made Hand of the King. Now, the meal that you're referring to there, I can understand people perhaps not remembering this, but this is a part of Cersei trying desperately to frame Marjorie. So where she's been asking around, is Marjorie, is she really a virgin sleeping with people? Can I get any scandal on her? And somebody says, well, her favorite musicians, this guy called the Blue Bard. And she basically decides, okay, this is my in. This is how I'm going to do it. She summons him and basically says, you're Marjorie Tyrell's favourite bard, aren't you? And he goes, well, I don't like to brag. And he says, well, when did you start sleeping with her? And he's like, what? I've never done that. And so she then arrests him, and the story goes on. He gets tortured and basically just said that he has to say in order to stay alive, which is to admit to all manner of terrible things that Marjorie did. That's how Marjorie ends up being handed over to the fate, basically. Now, Lord Merryweather is a bit nervous at this meal. Does he know that that's what Cersei's about to do? Probably not. But I think he, he basically later in the story he makes a run for it. He just gets out of there. I think he's realized that he is dabbling in things that he does not want to be a part of. He is made Hand of the King, which is incidentally, this is another, it's a very small one, but it's an echo of the Cersei, the Mad King kind of vibe going on. She's loving the wildfire. We saw that when she burns the Tower of the Hand. She loves the wildfire. She's obsessed by it. That's an echo of the Mad King. Here, appointing Lord Merryweather as Hand of the King, another echo of the Mad King. This time, he knows what's happened in the past. He's just going to get out of there. So his nervousness there, I think, is him realizing suddenly he is in over his head and he needs to get out of there. He's read this story before. He doesn't want to be a part of it. Mara Lee saying, I love listening to your Traveler's Guide series very much. Thank you. Will you be doing any more of this kind of series, exploring other places? I do. I get asked this a few times, actually. I really enjoyed the Traveler's Guide. If you've never watched those videos, I did them ages ago, but they were some of the videos that I enjoyed making the most. I would love to do them about Middle Earth. I say this every now and then. I suspect that probably that would contribute to the very strong copyright rules around Tolkien. So I suspect that something like that would probably go against those. So I'm going to hold back on doing that. I've considered doing it about the world of The Witcher, the continent. So that may happen at some point. Not in the next few months, but yeah, this is definitely something I have been thinking about. And if I can think of a way to do the in Middle Earth version of that, then I will definitely do that. Shar Littlefinger speaking about the three queens that the Little Peace and Quiet, the five kings left, will probably not survive for long. Two of those three queens are obviously Cersei and Marjorie. Is the third one Daenerys, or might it actually be Sansa? So this is when Sansa is in the Vale. Littlefinger comes back from being in King's Landing, and there's a really weird moment when he's there, basically forcing himself on her, getting a kiss from her, was kissing her, and she's really taken aback. She doesn't. She's still a child. After this, he says, I had hoped to have 4 or 5 quiet years to plant some seeds and allow some fruits to ripen, but now it is a good thing that I thrive on chaos. What little peace and order the 5 kings left us will not long survive the 3 queens. Now, lots of people saying, well, who are these 3 queens? Sansa asks, who are these 3 queens? And he basically ignores her. Now, the context clue is that this is about Sansa. The hint, I think, so the 2 queens definitely, yes, you're right, we've got Cersei, we've got Marjorie, but in his mind, what he's going to do is make Sansa another queen, because his broad plan, very high level, is that he thinks, okay, so I've got the Riverlands effectively because I'm Lord of Harrenhal. I've got the Vale because I'm Lord Protector there. In the north, the Boltons may well be there now, but all of the Starks, from his perspective, all of the Starks have gone. Rob's been killed. Bran and Rickon, everybody's heads have been killed. Arya disappeared and nobody knows where she's gone. So she's he's created an Arya, but there's an older sister with Sansa, who has, in his mind, got the best claim to Winterfell. So he's going to make Sansa queen. He's got 3 parts of the Seven Kingdoms already lined up now. So that's his plan, and that's him giving away a little bit of what it is. If it were Daenerys, then there's no reason for him to, he not just do his little grin at her. He would just say, "Yes, this is about there's that queen all the way over there. I think she's going to come to Westeros." There's no hint at this time Daenerys is coming to Westeros. He's disappeared. Question from 2 questions. Reflective rambling, picking up for Will Fahey. Do you think there might be a tie between the House Dane and the Empire of Dawn or ET? Also missed a super chat from Cloaked. Oh, do apologise, Cloaked One. Let's see whether I can find that. Is there a link between the Great Empire of the Dawn / ET and the Danes? The Danes are of a different ethnic group to everyone else, pretty much, as far as we can tell in Westeros. They're not Dornish. They have purple eyes. Now, George R. Martin has been clear this doesn't mean that they're Valyrians. Their own personal family legend is that they followed a falling star or a meteorite, which ended up on this Starfall, this island, which is where they built their home, and from that meteorite they forged the Sword of Dawn, and this is before anything happened west. So, like before the First Men and this, there was probably some trade or something going on down in Old Town, but this is all very back in the Age of Legend. Whatever, they are very old, and they have come from Essos, it would appear. So is there a link to ET and the Great Empire of Dawn? Well, there's a link across to Essos, and who was there at the time. Well, ET definitely has been around in different iterations for a long period of time. If this was all the way back then before, in the Dawn Age, then maybe it was the Great Empire of the Dawn. It's possible. There are others I know who've speculated a lot more on this than I have, so I would highly recommend you go and check them out. What I'm willing to say, or go as far as to say, is that I think that sword was around during the first long night. I think that their arrival, therefore, probably preceded that. Pardon me. So, and that is. So they may well have come from there. Does that mean that they are linked into some prophecy or legend over in ET? It doesn't mean it. It means it's possible. Cloaked One, I found your super chat. Picking up for LS. Do you think Westeros is connected to Essos via the Northern Wastes and other stories of the Last Hero or Long Night or Azor Ahai concerning the same events long ago? So I think the answer to both of these is yes. The stories of the Last Hero, the Long Night, Azor Ahai, it does seem to be universal. The details are slightly different, obviously between Azor Ahai and the Last Hero, but all of the hints are that this is becoming a monolith. It's coming from the one place, but it's come out in strands to different cultures, and over thousands of years has morphed into slightly different stories. So the Last Hero is the First Men's story of the Long Night. Azor Ahai is obviously something which comes from the Far East, and there are, if you go into the World of Ice and Fire, it gives 3 or 4 other names for this kind of character. So yes, that certainly appears linked. Is Essos and Westeros are they linked by land at the northern waste, as you say, basically at the North Pole? It certainly makes sense that they are. And indeed, if you look at the northeast of Yi Ti, and you find the five forts and the legends they have of the old knight. That does seem to imply that perhaps the others, the White Walkers, came down that way as well. They wasn't just across the wall, and so the five forts are some kind of equivalent fortification to keep out um, the others should they come back. So yes, we don't have definitive evidence, but all of the context clues are that that is the case. Let's go to a question from Jacob R. Glad to catch you live. Great to see you. And welcome, by the way, I should say, if this is your first time coming here for the live stream, it's great to see you. Please do get involved in the chat. Here's a little something for keeping me entertained at work. Thank you very much. What do you think House of the Dragon will shift to after the dance is over? So this is based on this idea, which is what we seem to be going towards. It's not been officially confirmed by HBO, but this is what showrunners have certainly talked about. This is that House of the Dragon is just going to be the badge for a whole series of bits of Targaryen history. Now, if you start reading George R. R. Martin's interviews about what has happened over with his relationship with HBO over the last few years, you see that clearly HBO came to the conclusion that in order to do the kinds of successor shows that they wanted to do successfully, they had to have George R. R. Martin's involvement. Ideally, with stories that had already been written. They got a bit burned by what happened with season 8 of Game of Thrones. So what that means is they decided not to do the long night that they did, Blood Moon or whatever it was they were going to call it. They ordered the pilot. They spent allegedly $35 million on this and decided not to go down that route. Instead, went with a story that George R. R. Martin, a bit of history George R. R. Martin had written and had finished writing, which was The Dance of the Dragons. I say all of that because what this means is that when they finish that, and is that going to be, well, if there's going to be 3 more seasons, it's at least a year between the seasons, probably 2. We're looking at 6, 7, 8 years before that's finished. What stories will we have from George R. R. Martin by then? Well, in Targaryen history, because that's what House of the Dragon is going to be. Probably still just what we have in Fire and Blood Part 1, because he's got more time he needs to be writing for The Winds of Winter. After that, I suspect he'll probably give himself a break to write an egg or 2, but then he will want to go into A Dream of Spring. Will he have done all of that and write Fire and Blood Part 2 before Dream of Spring? It's possible, but I doubt that will be out by the time they commission the follow-up to Dance of the Dragon, Bit of House of the Dragon, which is a rather rambly way of saying they're going to pick one of the bits of story that we've already got in Fire and Blood Part 1. The options there are Aegon's invasion. Perhaps you could do the Maegor and the Aegon the Uncrowned. You could perhaps do all of that bit. I suspect they wouldn't want to go quite that dark. They could do the Regency and follow straight on after the Dance of the Dragons. I would love that, but I suspect they would want to do that as if they do cover that as an entirety of the reign of Aegon III. Jaehaerys' reign is interesting because it's important, but not huge amounts happens. It's important because it's a time of broad peace. So if I had to guess, Aegon the Conqueror is the obvious thing that they're going to be doing after this. And question from a username redacted. Could the Doom of Valyria be the event that set the seasons out of motion and brought the White Walkers back. Um, so, in terms of setting the seasons out of motion, no, I don't think it is, um, because the seasons have been out of balance for longer than that. The cover bump from the very first book, first edition of book one, was um, I can't approach the exact something like in the mist, back in the mist of time, a preternatural event caused the seasons to be out of balance. Now, uh, that could a preternatural event could describe the Doom of Valyria, but that is in sort of more recent history, not what that was seen to apply. So that's thousands of years ago. That is something that will be something like the creation of the others, or the bringing of the others into the world, or whatever it is that George R. Martin has done for the introduction of the others. Um, in terms of could the Doom of Valyria be the thing which prompts the current set of events to be unfolding? I suppose it depends what you mean by the current set of events. Obviously, this is what leads to the Targaryens heading over to Westeros. So there is a link there, and if we're getting Aegon's prophecy, then that was preceded by Dana the Dreamer's prophecy about Doom of Valyria, and so perhaps that was bigger than just we need to get out of Valyria. Did include some element of what was going on there, so you could draw a line back to there for the dragon part of it. But was it the thing which the made all of the uh, others start moving again? Doesn't that seems too early for that? To be honest, they seem to be moving. Judging on what was happening with, say, Craster, he was um, for several years, many years, he has been offering up his sons to the extent that he's got a couple of generations of wife daughters. Um, and that implies that we're looking 20, 30, 40 years ago that at least the others were around. So, I mean, I don't have any evidence for this, and at some point I will try and construct a theory around it, but something around the time of the tragedy of Summerhall is more. I think that's me caught up in the chat. Let's go to a question from Mara Lee saying, I thought it was interesting that on House of the Dragon, the showrunners had a lot of important scenes in front of a weirwood tree. Why do you think this was? And do you think we'll see more of this, especially in season two, when Rhaenyra's son, Jacaerys, visits House Stark at Winterfell? So I agree. This was notable that they included the weirwood tree there. A lot of the important conversations happened in front of a weirwood tree in King's Landing, in the Red Deep. So that was, and the direction often drew our attention to it as well. Is this? Will we see more of this happening? Yes, because Jacaerys is going up to Winterfell, and surely they will link across to the weirwood tree there. I think what seems likely is that they're not. That seems likely at the moment is that they're not actually making this a plot point, other than to say the Weirwood Network's watching, and so our eye is going to be brought to that in a few different moments. So we see it in King's Landing, we will see it in Winterfell, we will see probably not actually Adam Velaryon wandering around the Isle of Faces, but we will see, I suspect, him go to the Isle of Faces. We will see that decisive dragon battle, dragons plummeting into um, the God's Eye Lake. So our eyes are going to be drawn to this a lot, but I don't think they're going to spell out what this is every time. One of the things which did come out from the Game of Thrones convention over the weekend was Matthew Needham was there, who plays Laris Strong, and he was asked by Kim Renfro, who is a well-known and respected journalist in this kind of world, particularly covering things like Game of Thrones. She asked whether there was a link between him and the Weirwood Network, or Wolbing, or that kind of thing. And he gave a very careful answer, which was basically not confirming it, but saying he enjoyed the fact that Laris inhabits that world between, is he this evil mastermind who knows everything, or is he just slightly creepy social climber? He didn't use those words, but that's what he was saying. And basically, he didn't. He acknowledged that you could see that without accepting that was the case, if that makes sense. So my interpretation of that was that they're happy for this. He and the showrunners are happy for this idea to be out there, but this isn't going to be a central part of the plot. Certainly, it wasn't in season 1. Maybe we'll see more later on. Question from LawnDuck20 saying, "Hello, Robert. How did the Stark direwolves get past the wall? Did the mother donkey paddle around Eastwatch, or did she pass through the gorge?" So this is the direwolf, which would have been a pregnant direwolf, which we end up seeing in that first brand chapter of book 1. Now, how did it get from north of the wall? I think it's not the exact method is not that as important. I think the wall is not as hard to get past as you might think. It's the short answer. At Eastwatch, then yes, maybe you can sort of doggy paddle your way across there. That doesn't seem to be the way that a wolf would go. At the western end, there is a ravine, the river at the bottom, and the wildlings just walk along the wall ends. Then there's a ravine, and sometimes the wildlings just literally go down the ravine and get past the wall. It's a long way out of their way, but if they want to not have to climb the wall, they can do that. So yes, the direwolf could have done that. Or third option, the direwolf could have gone under the wall. There are tunnels. Legendarily, there are tunnels under the wall, and my best guess is that this was guided there by Bloodraven, and Bloodraven may well know the way under the wall, or even through the wall. The Nightfall, there's a way through there. Is there a way that they could use that entrance? I don't know. My best guess is under the wall or down the ravine. Lady Mays Mormont saying, "I'll be listening today while on a road trip from Texas to Kansas to South Carolina to Florida and back to Texas over the course of 3 weeks." That sounds like an epic road trip. So I hope that all goes well for you. Currently halfway through the journey with my daughter and my dog. What holidays do we know of in Westeros? I recall Maiden's Day. I have to imagine the Targaryens may have had anniversary celebrations of the conquest. Yeah, George R. Martin doesn't tell us much about this, is the short answer. There is Maiden's Day, and the implication is that there are other days for the other aspects of the Seven, probably not the Stranger, which are celebrated. We get a mention from Marjorie, I think, of some sort of harvest festivals happening. I don't think she used that exact word, but that's the idea down in the Reach. And there certainly seems to be a recognition of name days, birthdays, effectively, but not much more. It doesn't seem to be as big a thing as it is in our world, holidays. Also asked whether George R. R. Martin is still planning to make Bran king. If so, how do we get from where he is now to that point? Is he elected using a democratic republic such as on the show? So I did cover this a little bit earlier on, but I'll pick up on the how he might get to be king. The way what they showed on the show, I think, was an attempt at showing a great council. It was such a cut down version, but that's what I think they were trying to show us effectively. The survivors at the end of all of this trying to figure out who are we going to make king. Now, so that wasn't a democratically elected leader. This was the lords deciding between themselves who it could be. And if you actually, I can remember thinking at the time, if you looked at who it was, there was 15 or so people there, and like 3 were Starks. One was best mate of a Stark. Another one was a sworn sword to a Stark. Another one was uh, sworn to the King of the North. The whole, yeah, another one would be hand of the King to the King of the North. The people who were there, this was stacked in favour of the Starks. So even if there had been any other candidates, the Starks would be able to push through whoever they wanted to on the show. In the books, this is one of those things where we were talking a little bit ago about what happened on the show may reflect a bit of what, or they might have done a nod towards what George R. Martin told them. I, that's the kind of thing you can look at and go, well, maybe George R. Martin said, and I'm thinking there might be a great council, and who does the great council decide? They decide eventually on Bran, and they just cut that down to we'll have the surviving lords decide it's Bran. So that's I think the sort of the end game of it. Bran will return. I think he will escape from Bloodraven's cave and head down south. I think he will end up in Winterfell, and it's going to be a matter of who's going to be Lord of Winterfell, because there are so many people who are going to have so many different backers, and he is going to be ending up as one of the most significant people, leaving aside all of the divas and stuff. He is going to be one of the most important figures because he will be without a title. So John could perhaps have put in a claim to be king, doesn't want it, was once Lord Commander of the Night's Watch. He's turning his back on all of these kinds of things. Sansa will, I suspect, want to be in Winterfell. This is where her story arc seems to be going full circle. She's in charge of her own fate in Winterfell. Arya doesn't want to be doing stuff, but Bran, if he turned around and said, "I want to be ruler of Winterfell," everyone would have had to fall in line. So the fact that he said no to that, because presumably he doesn't want to, will allow him then to be free to be put forward to be the king. Because who else could do it? Who else has got the support of the Lords of the Realm? I think what we will end up with is a situation where he just appears to be the most sensible candidate we cover. They don't want anyone with any Targaryen links. They won't want anyone with Lannister links. They won't. A lot of the other lords may well be quite young. We might have Robert Arryn as being the lord there. You don't want to make him king. Who is left? It's going to be the Tyrells, most largely be decimated. So who's left? Bran may well turn into the most obvious candidate. Let's go to a question from James F. Parham saying, I watched the George R. R. Martin interview with History of Westeros, and the most interesting part for me was near the end of the interview when George R. R. Martin said that the Doom of Valyria was an accident, so not the Faceless Men. This struck me as one of the rare admissions by George R. R. Martin about mysteries in his work. In that same interview, there are some examples where he plays about name origins that are obviously derivative, parallel lives as well as the homage. In this context, I personally think we can downgrade the Faceless Men hypothesis for the Doom. What are your thoughts? Well, my first thought is if you've not seen the History of Westeros interview with George R. R. Martin. Definitely worth a look. Go and check out their channel quite easily. I think it's one of the most significant interviews that we've had with George R. R. Martin in recent times, setting out his understanding of canon, how that where he sees his role for canon for the shows as well as the books, um, and a lot of other thoughts about magic and the role of magic. Now, that's where this comes in. So he says, and if you want to go to, I'll just scribble it down here, 107, so an hour and 7 minutes in, if you want to go and look at this. So don't take my word for it, have a look at the context and see what you think there. Basically, they come to the conclusion, or he comes to the conclusion and says, magic is dangerous and unreliable in the world. That's what he said. And Aziz, you can hear him just sort of prompt, there would have been accidents. And George R. R. Martin says, and there were, the Doom of Valyria, for example. And he's got, I'd say, watch it yourself to come to your own conclusion. He's got a slightly cheeky look in his eye. He does enjoy doing this kind of thing. And so I don't think we can just take that on its face value who's saying, well, this was just an accident. Now, what kind of accident could there be with caused the Doom of Valyria? Well, maybe if the doom was the volcanoes all blown up and they had magicians, it would appear, keeping the volcanoes from blowing up. So if those magicians had an accident, then that will have caused the problem. So is this a cast iron? George R. R. Martin saying this was just an accident and the Faceless Men weren't involved? Well, I don't think so. Ashaya does actually say, just sort of say to him, she doesn't phrase it as a question. She just sort of says, yeah, and there are speculations that Faceless Men might have done this. And George R. R. Martin basically just then goes into what he said a lot of times is he likes the fact that people discuss this. He likes the fact that there are different theories. So it's not a full confirmation, I think, that that was an accident rather than the Faceless Men. You could argue that when he's saying it was an accident, that covers the fact that they were taking for granted that they could stop the volcano from blowing up, but they hadn't thought about Faceless Men getting involved. That could be interpreted as an accident, but it does undoubtedly, in my mind, increase the possibility that we have to say that this was literally just an accident. I don't think he gave the impression of that he thought he was giving away a huge secret here, but who knows? As I say, go and check it out for yourself. I'd love to, maybe if you're watching this back later, drop a comment down in the comment section whether you think that was him actually literally saying that was an accident. There was no intentionality about that. There were no Faceless Men. So go and check that out. Let's go to question in the chat. Paris Ballerina. This is Rhodonite. Pick up question. What do you think of the possibility of Lancel dying after the Battle of the Blackwater and being resurrected by the High Septon? He seems to have many of the symptoms of a zombie. I mean, theoretically, but my take is that the Faith of the Seven are not about the zombie thing. There are lots of people who are bringing people back to life. I've not seen the Faith of the Seven involved in that. So I think that would go against it, and I think that would take the story in a completely different turn. So my instinct is no. I think that the Occam's razor on this is that Lancel is what we think. He's just somebody who's had a traumatic incident and time, and then is getting influenced by some radical thinking. Alham, how do you think Jon's body would function when he's resurrected? in turn, do you think he will be in a romantic relationship with Dany in the show? So, in terms of how what John's body will function when he's resurrected, I think this is one of the most fascinating things that he is going to go into. I think he is going to go into walk into his direwolf ghost, and then he is going to be called back when his body gets defrosted. His body's going to go to the ice cells. When his body gets defrosted, he will get called back from Ghost and put into his own body. Now, we've had plenty of warning that if you go into your direwolf when your body dies, then you will start to become subsumed by that direwolf's personality. You will become more wolfish. So when John comes back into his body, then first of all, there's a matter of getting the body itself back up and working. And then secondly, it's a matter of making John be as human as possible. Now, I've said this many times before, and spoilers for the Assassin's Apprentice first-year trilogy by Robin Hobb. If you've never read it, skip forward 2 minutes. In that, Robin Hobb is one of George Martin's great writing friends. They wrote their stories. They started writing at the same time. Robin Hobb's gone off and written a lot more since then. But in that, the main character, the bastard-born son of the heir to the throne, who has a warging ability and a bond with a wolf. I'm now talking about Robin Hobb, not A Song of Ice and Fire. In that character effectively dies. I know fans of books will tell me it's slightly more complicated than that, but effectively dies and is buried. His spirit goes into the wolf, and then his body is brought back, and then his spirit is pushed back into his body again. And after that, what we have in that story is an extended period where the wolfishness has to be almost beaten out of him. He becomes very wolfish. I think George R. Martin will not be able to resist writing about John as a wolf, being very wolfy. What does this mean in terms of his character? Who he's going to be like when what he's going to be like? He's going to be more like Ghost. He's going to be more wolf-like. He's going to be more of a loner. He's going to be quieter. He's also going to be more pack minded. And has more of a killer instinct. So that is what we're going to be seeing, I think, from John afterwards. Do I think he'll be in a romantic relationship with Dany? I think that's certainly the way that George Martin has been writing this story so far. They're in the missions that Dany gets in the House of the Undying, and also you can certainly look at all of the incesty bits of the story as leading up to this final unexpected incest. So yes, that's certainly the way he's written it. He could change his mind on that one, but that's certainly where I think he's going. Let's Mara Lee saying, can you remind us what was going on in Bravos during the time of the Dance of the Dragons? The short answer is not a lot. Bravos largely stayed out of this. The Greens split the treasury and sent a quarter of it to the Iron Bank. They also provided some ships that helped the Arryns out. But broadly speaking, they kind of stayed out of it, which is understandable because there were dragons flying everywhere, and that's the last thing that they wanted. So I think they probably sat down and had a little strategic think and thought, actually, what we really need is for all these dragons to kill each other. So let's let them get on with it. And I think it was a deliberate staying out of this. 444 saying, what do we know about the calendar in Westeros? How many days in a week, month, year? What about names, etc.? So this is what George R. Martin has said. So this is a quote from him. He says there are 12 moon turns to a year as on Earth. Even on our Earth, years have nothing to do with the seasons or with the cycles of the moon. A year is a measure of a solar cycle of how long it takes the Earth to make one complete revolution around the sun. The same is true of the world of Westeros. So a year is a year, and a month is a turn of the moon. He doesn't talk about month names. He doesn't talk about weekday names, really. So all of that is unknown. But what we have is a clear 12 moon cycles are one year. And a year, he said elsewhere, a year on Westeros is about the same as a year for us. So that's the extent of what he's said. He doesn't like to go too much into that, probably because he fears that he might give away something about the nature of the unbalancing of the seasons. But he was happy to say, in terms of the calendar side, that that's what we've got going on. Okay. Love who? Hi there. Saying, I have a question that might be a bit silly, since I could just look it up. I'm curious to hear your take. Are there any drawings or paintings of people in A Song of Ice and Fire? There are lots, and thank you for asking this. I will very happily quickly rattle through a few excellent artists. In terms of the sort of broader fan community, I'm sure now my moderators are scrabbling around trying to find links to these people, but do check out Sam Rixian, Cole, who attach Altinos, and who else in the fan community? Well, I think I'll keep it to there. In terms of more broadly, Mark Simonetti has done some fantastic artwork. I'm a big fan of Natalie Villeneuve, who's done some excellent artwork as well. A lot of George R. Martin has done a lot of books with extra commissioned art in them. So Fire and Blood, which is of House of the Dragon, was based off of, had a lot of work from Doug Wheatley, which was wonderful as well. So lots is the answer. Just if you just Google any character or situation in Song of Ice and Fire, you will find lots of pictures. Was this in-world art were you talking about? World art, yes, there is. The art that we've got is more about, if that's what we're talking about here. So apologies if I've misunderstood. We get a lot of those lots of minstrels, so we've got lots of music going on. There are tapestries, which seems to be the main sort of artwork. There are not so many paintings. We don't really read so much about paintings as an artwork. I think so. Yeah, music and tapestries and the like is the main types. And if you're in the chat, I knew I could trust my the moderators already coming up with links to some of these fantastic artists out there. So thank you for that. Question from Catherine Furseth saying, "Hi Robert, having just read A Feast for Crows, I wanted to ask you your best guess regarding the Riverlands plot going forward, and as an extension of that, the stories of Brienne and Jaime. Brienne in the books is more vulnerable than the TV show, younger and more lost. How will her story go from where we are now to the end of A Dream of Spring? And Jaime, with his forever warring duality, will his eventual death also be dual, if honourable and at the same time not?" Well, there's a one thing I've said before, actually, when I was doing that video ages ago about how long will the Winds of Winter be, one of the things I said there, which I still believe is the case, is that the most complex bit of this story right now, in terms of the different moving parts, is what's going on in the Riverlands. Some bits of the story, Arya is on her own up in Bravos. Other bits of the story, we get a few moving parts. You've got Daenerys with lots of people coming to meet her. But in the Riverlands, we've got Jaime and Brienne. Sandor is probably still out there as well. He will come back into this at some point. We've got Lady Stoneheart with the remains of the Brotherhood without banners. We've got some people who've left the Brotherhood without banners. We've got the Blackfish. We've got the garrison that was at River Run. We've got various other types of people like Brave Companions just wandering around. How the exact story evolves depends on how George Martin. We've got the super pack of wolves as well. How George R. Martin, the order he wants them to meet each other, and that will change the story completely, depending on the iteration of interactions. So, saying exactly how it's going to work out is complex. I'll come back to the details of Damien Brienne in a moment. Say that the meta narrative, I think, of the Riverlands is that in the last book, it was about the Lannisters taking over the Riverlands. This book is going to be about Stark loyalists getting revenge and taking it back. So we will see Riverrun being taken over once more. We will see the Freys starting to get their comeuppance. The super pack, which is being led of wolves, which is being led by Nymeria, bonded to Arya, they are already starting to attack the Freys. And we just see them just like references to them about what they've been doing. They're starting to attack the Freys now. So this bit by bit is going to turn into how the Lannisters get kicked out of the Riverlands. Now, Jaime and Brienne, their interactions with Lady Stoneheart, I touched on this a little bit earlier, are absolutely fascinating because there's this circle or triangulation of oaths and promises that they've been making. Lady Catelyn, released Jaime on promise of him getting her children back. He passed that promise on to Brienne, who has been trying to do this, but Brienne has also sworn fealty to Catelyn. So there's a whole load of bits of honor and interaction going on between those three. Basically, Jaime is going to have to prove his honor in some way. Now, Jaime has actually reached. We often talk about him conflicting. He has reached an interesting point here, where the last couple of chapters we saw of Jaime in the last book, he's actually made up his mind, in the short term at least, to turn his back on his family. We see this again and again in little bits. When he sat there in River Run and he sees the snow start to fall, he thinks winter's finally come. And he thinks, well, how would my father prepare for this? And then he goes, you know what? I wouldn't do it like he would do it. Then he thinks, then Cersei sends him this letter basically saying, come and help me, Jaime. I need you to come back to King's Landing. And he just scrunches it up, throws it into the fire. And it's just like, no, I'm turning my back on that. And when Brienne comes and finds him and he goes off with Brienne, this is him turning his back on the Lannisters. So at this moment in time, actually not conflicted. He's on a journey away from the Lannisters and heading towards embracing his honor. So that's where we are. I think I would agree with you very much. Brienne is a lot more vulnerable in the book. The two of them have to now act together. And I think that is going to be where this ends up, is they're going to have to together show their loyalty, that they have not given up on this thing that they have effectively promised Catelyn, Lady Stoneheart. Martin S. saying, the Red Comet seems to have some similarity with the Conqueror Star in Memory Spawned by Tad Williams. Do you think there is some inspiration there? Astrological things and like exist in fantasy elsewhere. Yes. So there are. It's been a while since I read Memories for Anthorn, I will say. Though it is excellent. I am a fan of Tad Williams, and there are um, undeniably echoes of that in Song of Ice and Fire. George R. R. Martin has name-checked Tad Williams without explicitly saying where, if anywhere, he's taken inspiration from this, but there are definite echoes. With the comet, yes, but um, this is something, as you say, which is almost a fantasy staple. The idea that magic comes from above and a red comet heralds things. This is, I mean, you saw it in Rings of Power as much as anything else. That was where Meteor Man came from, and the people were looking at it and seeing it as a sign and a portent. They didn't make that up. There, the showrunners there. That's a staple of fantasy. I can remember a friend of mine said, "Oh, that's exactly the same storyline as in one of the Final Fantasy stories," and it's like, "Oh, okay, didn't know that. I'm not really a Final Fantasy person myself, but it's there as well." And you can go through huge amounts of classic fantasy stories and see comets in the sky as portents of something, and more broadly as a concept that magic comes from above. Pardon me. And that's got the echo of what I was talking about earlier with House Dane following the star. I mean, all of this, I guess, is very biblical in a way. They were following the star from the east, where the star landed. That's where they set up home, and they forged dawn from it. It's a magical sword. So, yes, there are echoes there. I must reread Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn, but I don't think it's specific to that story. I think this is more of a fantasy statement. Caius Ballerina picking a question up for Constantine Thranos. In the Game of Thrones fan convention, Kit Harington claimed that Ned would have disapproved of Dany's death because it was similar to Jaime's decision to kill Aerys. What are your thoughts? So, Ned, I didn't see that, so I don't know the exact context of what was said there. Ned and Jaime had an odd relationship because Jaime, when Jaime killed the Mad King, Aerys II, he did it there in the main throne room, and then he sat on the Iron Throne, waiting to see who was going to come through the doors, is what we're told. Because he just betrayed the oath that he had sworn. He was there to be a king's guard, and he had killed the king, and so he's waiting to see who's going to come in. It's almost like I can't believe what I've just done. I'm just going to give myself up to the fates. That's the feeling of what Jaime did and said. Ned Stark came through, and he saw Jaime on the Iron Throne, and he came to the conclusion, because he's not a big Lannister fan, Ned Stark, but he came to the conclusion that Jaime had done this with the intention of being king himself, because he killed the king and was sitting on the Iron Throne. Now you can understand why Ned might have come to that conclusion, and I suspect not everybody was thinking with their right mind at the time. It was the end of an incredibly grueling war, and they'd just seen horrors happening outside in King's Landing. So that is why Ned didn't like Jaime. It wasn't that you killed Aerys. Yes, he would call him an oath breaker and things like that, but I think that the irony is that Ned and Jaime, in a way, have this connection. which is that Jamie is being um, accepting people throwing all of this at him, being a kingslayer, being an oath breaker. He knows deep down that he's done the right thing. Ned, after this, heads off and allows people to be throwing all of these insults at him for having a bastard child and breaking his own sort of nobility and things like that. But he knows that he's done the right thing as well because he's protecting John. So they do actually have this kind of echo to them. And Jamie didn't like the way that Ned reacted to him because he'd obviously just saved the city and Ned didn't give him a chance to do that. So, and they didn't have a proper chat about it because then Robert Baratheon arrived soon afterwards, and there was the um, killing of the Rhaegar's children, and Ned basically stormed out. So it wasn't. As I say, I haven't seen that clip of Kit Harington talking about that, saying Ned would have disapproved of killing Dany because it was similar to Jamie's decision to kill Aerys. I don't think that Ned would disapprove if he'd sat down and been told all of the context there. I don't think Ned would have disapproved of that specifically, and I think that perhaps he would have. I think I'm saying I disagree with Kit Harington here, but I did not see him give that answer, so I don't know all of the context. Right. Well, let's keep saying Robert is in good shape. Well, thank you very much. Let's go to a question from, I think I've got 2 or 3 more questions from my patrons. Mike McFly, I was just wondering, as a thought experiment, do you think it would have been different if you'd first listened to A Song of Ice and Fire as an audiobook instead of reading the actual books in the way that you care and love the stories? Would it have been different at all? I find this a fascinating question because I've probably relayed this story too many times, but how I interacted with books, first of all, was um, I bought book one ages ago. I was at a bookshop with a friend who we've all got friends who we trust their judgment on books, and my friend picked it up off book one. I came and picked it off the bookshelf and said, "You'll love this, Robert. You think this is great." And I trusted him, and I bought it. But I said, "You know what? I think I'd just been stung by Robert Jordan and the Wheel of Time. He died before finishing his stories," and I said, "I'll wait for George R. R. Martin to finish writing this the series first before I start reading this book." Put it on my. Then a while later, Game of Thrones season 1 came out, and I watched it, loved it. I thought, I think I've got that book still on my bookshelf. Found it, read the book, then immediately went into reading the rest of the books that were out at the time, and then I watched a TV show. So I've watched my introduction to the world was the first season, then the books, then the rest of the seasons, which has left me with this slightly weird thing in that normally I'm a read the book first, then watch the TV show. And so I'm comparing what's happening on the TV show with what was in my mind when I read the book. But when it came to Game of Thrones, it was halfway the other way around. Because half of the characters, when I was reading the book, it was with in my head. That was my mental image. Tyrion going through when I was reading, which probably wasn't that helpful because the Tyrion in the books looks quite different to Peter Dinklage, who is far too handsome a man for the character that George R. R. Martin writes. But to come to your point, would if I'd first read them by audiobook rather than reading them physically, would that make sense? And I found myself trying to work through this. What is the difference? Because I do now a lot of the reading I do actually is by audiobooks. And I would say probably the biggest difference is that with my audiobooks for Game of Thrones, I approach them on a chapter by chapter basis, in a way that with the book, reading the book, I don't. What I found with reading the book was I would just sit down and just charge my way through, and then you know, got tired or ran out of time, then I would put the book down and I'd pick it up, and then I'd just charge on through. Listening to it, it makes so much more sense to me just chapter by chapter because George R. Martin, particularly in the early book um, books, um, he treats it, he structures this each chapter sort of like a mini short story, um, in that you have a setup, you have some conflict, you have some resolution, which may be in actions or it may be in character development. And as I have listened to it, I have tried to just do a chapter at a time, and and then thinking about it allowed me to go, okay, so now I understand what he was trying to do in that chapter. This character has moved from this place to this place, um, in a way that I did not when I was reading it because I was just wanting to rush through the story. So that I think is probably the biggest difference in terms of the reading experience for me between physically reading it and listening to the audiobook. Um, I've got actually my last couple of questions are from my patrons about Lord of the Rings things, so which I will definitely answer. But now, if you've got any other questions about A Song of Ice and Fire, then do drop them into the chat. Martin Siestran saying, I have a follow-up question regarding an answer to one of my super chat questions last week. I asked about how much greater than Narsil the greatest sword Aula could forge would be. I answered it as if it was a question if Aula could forge a sword that is greater than Narsil. But you're wanting to know how much greater could it be? A lot greater. So, yet one of the things you say in that. So, for those who don't know, in Tolkien's world, we have the Valar, who are just like it's sort of like the ruling pantheon of gods, but they're not actually God. They're sort of a step down from it. And they all have their specialities. Aula is the smith, and he is the creator of things. Now, could he create something greater than something like Narsil? Yes, which is what I answered last time. How much greater? Many, many times greater. What you said in your question just now, I think you came up with a really good example of the levels at which we're talking in Tolkien's world. There is a huge difference between the normal people, and then the next level up being, say, the Maiar, where you get people like Gandalf, Balrogs, and the like, and then the Valar, who are literally able to shape and change the world. Now, if you have the ability to, and Aula had the ability, he created the dwarves. If you have the ability to do that kind of thing, you could make a sword which could cut through anything. It would be so much more powerful than um, Narsil. So, on a scale of magnitude greater than you could possibly imagine, would be my take. But they hold themselves back because that would be the Valar are there to um, guide and oversee rather than most of the time intervene directly. They do intervene directly, but uh, they try their best not to. And Callie Summer saying, "Hi Robert, could you talk a bit about the nature of Tolkien's dragons? You've mentioned that you don't think that the dragons are Maiar, but a mockery of Morgoth or something like the eagles. But the first dragons were wingless, showed a lot more agency and cast their own magic. They seem more like Balrogs in battle than emergency allies. So they are not Maiar. Maiar are immortal beings that have existed before the beginning of time, like the Valar. So they are not Morgoth created the Balrogs. basically what we have is this situation where we get in the first age, he's there hiding out in his base Angband, and he's being surrounded by the elves and all the forces of goodness in this ridiculously long siege. Um, he's far too dug in; they can't get him, but he also can't get out. But he uses this time; he doesn't just sit there to build his forces, so that when he does get out, which he does, he can overwhelm Middle Earth. And we're told that he orcs he'd already created, which we know are a mockery of the elves, but he then created the dragons. Now, yes, the first dragon did not have wings, so this is more of a prototype, um, and was a very magical kind of being. But Glaurung is what we're talking about here. But then he sort of like changed, gave them wings, and Calagon, a massive dragon, and um, because they are created beings, they are not Maiar. So the distinction is very clear. However, they are magical beings which have been created by Morgoth. So when we get down to Smaug, this is many, many, many generations later, and they're not a patch on those early dragons, but they are still magical and powerful beings. Right, let's have a quick flick through the chat. The Effective Rambling saying, shameless self-plug. I have 2 giveaways on Twitter, The Fall of Numenor, and then Alison Funko must be willing to email me an address. So The Fall of Numenor, I am actually talking about listening to books. I am listening to that right now. It came out around the time of the Rings of Power, and this is a pulling together of Tolkien writings about Numenor. But it's not just about Numenor. This is basically, and I'm delighted that I finally got to do it, because it is basically telling the story of the Second Age by drawing all of the things that Tolkien wrote in lots of different places, in the Silmarillion and appendices to the Lord of the Rings, yes, but also unfinished tales in the history of Middle Earth, in his letters, lots of different places, pulling it all together into a cohesive narrative. I think it's brilliant. I'll probably do a longer review when I've finished reading it, but I think it's really good. So that's highly recommended. And do go and follow Rambling over on Twitter. And me, I'm on Twitter. Grimace saying Dark Star is a badass. Yes. LS saying, is there more to Dark Star? Could he be younger than we think? Could he be Ashara's bastard? What does he know? I feel like he might be pivotal at some point. Yes, he probably will be pivotal-ish. But one of the things, this is again coming back to that 5-year time gap, what seems to have been the plan was you have Ned Dane, this character who is he's now Lord Dane effectively, but he's still a child, gets caught up in the Brotherhood without banners. When there was going to be a 5-year time gap, he would have aged up a bit, and he would have taken over a lot of the plot line of what we have with Dark Star, Gerald Dane. The 5-year time gap didn't happen, so George R. R. Martin created a new character to have this second part of that story. Rhodonite saying, do you think the death of Lady influenced Sansa to become more wolfish in the same way that a warg dying transfers some of their man into the wolf, leading to Sansa stealing lemon cakes? No, I think that the death of Lady is to show Sansa as being slightly separate and different to the rest of the Starks. They are all connected in some way through their direwolves. Sansa gets cut off, and that is her fate. that is what we see from her, is that she, in King's Landing, she is cut off from the rest of the Starks. She has no contact with the Starks at all. She goes up, she's out of control, she's never in control of her own fate in the way that the other Starks have managed to stay in control of their own fate to greater or lesser degrees. That is what we've got here, is to show and signify her slight difference to the rest of the Starks. She would have had a walking bond with Lady if that had carried on. George Martin is clear about that, but that just didn't survive for long enough. Okay, I think with that, it's time to. Oh, I've got a question. Thank you very much. Beautiful Lights saying, "Hey Robert, I love your channel. I have learned so much about Song of Ice and Fire, Game of Thrones, House of the Dragon for you. Showing some love. Thanks for all you do." Well, thank you so much. I hugely appreciate that. That's very kind. I think what I will do, though, is just use this as an opportunity to tell you a few things that are coming up next week. Same time will be a live stream. It's going to be my annual Christmas charity live stream. I haven't invited anyone yet, but I should be inviting a few special guests to come along, and slightly more relaxed. Do come to that. I haven't decided the charity yet, but I will let you know. In terms of videos, I'm getting back up to doing a couple of videos a week. So tomorrow I've got Targaryen family, which when I started writing right at the beginning of House of the Dragon, thinking this will be useful for people, going into House of the Dragon, and then I never finished it. And now I thought, well, I might as well put it up anyway. So that's happening. But I've got a couple of Tolkien videos coming up about Sting, how powerful was Sting, and also Thranduil, Legolas's dad, who I have low-key hated on for a long time, but have come to a conclusion that actually Tolkien wants to go easy on him. So that's a video that I'm looking forward to coming soon. But if you are watching this back a little bit later, appearing somewhere around here will be a link to other live streams that I have done. A link appearing somewhere around here is going to be to Patreon, which is the best way to support this channel if you wish to do so. Thank you, patrons. Thank you, moderators. You are wonderful. Take care, everyone, and I will see you again next time.